Hello everyone, this is Caillou, and I'm back with Kevin Norton, Dodger, and Pipsqueak. And today we're going to be reviewing Monsters of Chikyu, a new set that's getting added to MSEM on January 1st, and it's kind of a unique one. It's, I think, not our first fan set, but I think it's the one which I'm most excited for, personally. And as you can see by the Mewtwo here, it's an adaptation of Pokemon, um, but as a plane in the multiverse, not as just the concept of Pokemon. So we'll be seeing that throughout as this review continues. But first, I'm going to throw it to Kevin to explain some of the mechanics of the set.
So, Monsters of Chikyu introduces two new mechanics and has two returning ones. The first of which is Experience, one that has shown up a bunch of times across MSEM sets. Basically, what it does is every time this attacks, if it has two or fewer counters on it, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. So eventually, you can get up to three +1/+1 counters on it. Pretty good mechanic. There's a lot of good cards with it. The first new mechanic is Harness, which is kind of like a single creature convoke. When you cast a spell with Harness, you can tap a creature you control, reduce the cost by that creature's power. There's Phasing. I'm not going to explain Phasing. And then there's Vanguard, which is basically kind of pseudo exalted. It does a thing whenever a creature attacks just all by itself. Yeah, those are the four primary mechanics. There's some sub themes, a bit of transforming for evolution, but those are the ones to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and I
I
think
do
where
want to make
monsters
the
of...
brief note
Oh,
that
sorry, go ahead.
Monster Chikyu does not have phasing, it only has phases out. And while that might seem like an arbitrary distinction, phases out is the mechanic that Wizards of the Coast has deemed good enough to return, whereas phasing, I think, is going to just be lost forever because it is a obnoxious to play with downside mechanic. But I think that the general use of phases out in this set is pretty solid.
Yeah, and I think one thing is, there have been lots of like attempts to adapt Pokemon into MTG. It's a common and popular IP, so that's no surprise. Where Monsters of Chikyu really gets it right is it doesn't uh, try to think too hard or like overstress about getting the mechanics exactly flavorful. It gets them playing well, and that ends up being entirely to the set's favor and makes it feel like this cohesive, fun experience rather than, oh, this feels like Pokemon, but it doesn't really feel like Magic.
Yeah, I think there is a very strong bias within some custom Magic circles against fan sets, and I think Monsters of Chikyu is the type of fan set that needs to show up more to really override those biases. But I think most fan sets fail because fundamentally they are a fan project first and a set second. And the only fan sets that really don't fall prey to this are things like Skyrim or Hollows, where they're kind of a generic fantasy setting. So it's like, okay, sure, whatever. This fits in fine with my Magic the Gathering cards. But then second someone's like, this is my Star Wars fan set, you tend to end up like saying, well, I don't have flying, I have this mechanic, and just it all kind of goes to
Yeah,
shit.
like Star Wars The Gathering is a popular one, and I think you're referencing Spaceflight instead. And there it's like self contained, but yeah, I think Monsters Chikyu just works with other Magic sets. As you can see, as it's getting into MSCM proper. Um, but I don't want to also I also want to make sure that we don't make it sound like it's abandoning the trappings of Pokemon entirely. It's still very much a world of Pokemon and has a lot of cool, flavorful nods to the to like the setting and IP that it's based on.
Yeah,
It
Pokemon, but kind of angling a bit darker, like it's Pokemon by way of Ikoria. These are actual monsters here.
I think one of my favorite things in this set is how many different flavor texts just have Lucian, who's one of the more brutal planeswalkers in the MSE verse, like, very much an apex predator. And he is just having a miserable fucking time on this plane because everything is just like as ferocious and horrific as he is.
And then you have the contrast of that, of like Karina and like other flavor texts where it's just like children not exactly romping throughout, but then like there's definitely lots of like just moments of like gazing in wonder and like ecstasy at this beautiful world. So there's like this very like cool like two sides of the coin thing where it's like it's very pretty and amazing on the outside, but also it's still a world of monsters.
Yeah, yeah. And then you have Bessie just kind of vibing out in the background,
Mm-hmm.
which goals, I guess.
But yeah, I think we've been talking about these characters and stuff, but we should get into talking about the cards so that we can actually show them off. So I'm going to start us off with Bright Eyed Trainer over here. So it's 1 and a white for a 1/1 human, and it's basically a hate bear. Spells cost 1 more to cast for each colored mana symbol in their mana cost beyond the first, which might be a little bit hard to wrap your head around at first, but the reminder text here helps out with that. So I think being
I
a
think.
human. Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Go ahead.
sorry.
I was going to say like the first thing that comes to mind is obviously like you curve this into High King Ulfric, and then you go ham.
You actually can't curve this into High King Ulfric because it makes Ulfric
Oh, it
more.
makes. Oh yeah. Oh no, that's all spells. And for some reason,
You
I
could
thought it was.
go like
No,
Yeah.
it's beyond
you
the
could,
first
turn to
though.
Monument, and
It's
then
Well,
it's beyond the first though, so it wouldn't make
No,
it
no, but
cost.
I
well,
don't
no.
think. I think it's. I don't think
There's
it's just for
two
the same
color
color.
mana
yeah,
symbols.
this
Yeah.
taxes multicolor spells, which is actually very, very important because well, we've seen some very powerful multicolor cards being added to the format recently, and they're seeing a lot of play. And well, making them cost more is going to be good, but the question is it worth a 2-mana 1/1?
How often is this better than Spellbane Elite, Spellbane Adept? The white bear
That's a 1/3, right? And it
It's a
taxes instant
2/1.
4/3s.
It's a 2/1.
it's a
Yeah.
2/1.
Oh, okay.
And
Yeah, I
like
think like. Oh, sorry.
this is better against villainy, but also like it's a 1/1. This dies to a stiff breeze. Like the fact that if this was a 2/1, I think it'd be a lot more interesting. But 1 power is just kind of shit in aggressive decks because this just provides no pressure whatsoever. It gets swept up by any sweepers. Like, yeah, it'll make the sweepers cost 1 more if they're on Violent Collapse, Vibrant Rapture, etc. But it feels like too cute of a meta call. Like, it's so easy to sidestep this. It doesn't affect 1 mana spells. Most 2 mana and a lot of 3 mana spells, it's only taxing by 1. Like, it starts to get nuts versus things like Villainy, but they just say, cool, I won't play Villainy until I clear out this trainer. And
Honestly,
that doesn't
Spellbane
seem
Adept is
hard
probably
ask.
better against Villainy than this is because that taxes all their cantrips.
Yep,
Yeah, honestly,
I strongly agree.
you know what? I was a lot higher on this when I had the mistaken assumption that I could curve it to High King Ulfric because I was thinking like Lone Survivor has kind of like centralized this idea of hate bears around it, which also is like you're like where do all these human hate bears go? And I think that like then you have this interesting thing of like okay, well Ulfric makes it so that you want to play like human hate bears. I was thinking that this would add to that kind of like
You can go.
Ulfric
You can go
versus
turn
Survivor.
you can go turn 2 Monument, turn 3 cast Ulfric, put this in.
Right, but then at that point, like,
It's like
having
fine.
having the inherent anti synergy just already feels like backbreaking, and you can just play again, like you can just play Spellbane Adept.
Yeah, I think I would be a lot more interested in this if it had the second power. This also lines up very poorly into Sheldrin's Rage because it doesn't even tax it, and it also just dies to the unkicked version. And that's one of the more played wipes in the format. Yeah, I think this card is like it's the stars will need to align for it to be good, but I'm not willing to like completely write it off because it does tax a lot of random stuff.
Mm-hmm. So getting
Notably,
into sorry, but yeah, I
sorry,
think
no,
getting into a 2 mana white card that definitely does bring the power. We've got Curious Cubs. It's a 2/2,
This
but it has experience, so it attacks as a 3/3 first strike, and then of course after 3 turns of attacking, it grows into a 5/5 first strike, which buffs itself for the rest of your board, which should just be GG at that point.
Yeah, that's who.
this is one of the more fucked up watch wolves we've ever seen printed. There have been people such as Dodger who have played much worse 2 drops in their green white aggro decks because they're not humans. So Curious Cubs, I think, makes me way higher on Lone Survivor decks as a whole.
Yeah, this goes in those decks for sure. This is mostly a better Guardian of Divergent.
Yeah.
Guardian can attack as a 4/4 on turn 3, but this just scales way
You know
more
what? If
easily.
this is what it'll take to get Lone Survivor decks to stop running Guardian, then I'm all for it.
That's kind of where I'm at.
I mean, Guardian is not a bad card,
They,
but
okay, I don't want to get
this
into that here, but yeah, it's just suffice to say I disagree.
yeah, I think that the issue with this is that it can still be chump blocked, which is like already one of the bigger issues when you were running this kind of deck is that you're kind of just big dumb idiots do get stonewalled by boards of tokens, which doesn't happen a ton, but like the fact that it can happen is kind of awkward. Overall, I like that this thing kind of just feels itself. You don't need to like you can just run this down on turn 2 and then not play anything else, and your opponent will have to answer it. And if their whole hand is just board wipes, then this is a great way to draw one out without spending too many resources.
Yeah, this eats removal like a truck.
I mean, I think that's a good thing, though. Like, one of the most important things of these sorts of decks is being able to tax your opponent's removal such that once you stick your top end, they're out. They had to spend it all surviving. And now you have a lone survivor that's locking them out of cantrips and beating them down because they had to kill your one-drop threat that I can't think of and your cubs.
Yeah, and it's like
From
because it
Ruffian.
naturally grows, it's like
Yeah,
there's
Ruffian
this
is a
like
great
there's
one.
this thing of like, oh god damn it, well I want to wait and then like run out with the violent collapse, but I can't do that because if I do that then it'll grow into a 4/4, and it's just like
You
all
also
of this. Yeah.
you can also kind of trivially flip it on 3. Like you go, turn 1, here's my one drop threat. Turn 2, here's Cubs. Turn 3, here's KD -2, but 2+1/+1 counters on Cubs. And the other thing, Cubs
Also true.
swings. It gets 2 more +1 counters. It is now a 5/5 first strike, a 6/6 because you have
Also, if
another
this deck
attacking
still runs
creature.
Anomalion, that's just I think that's a key.
I think it would remove all the counters actually, Pep.
It
Because
would.
it would get 2 at once and then remove all the counters.
Yeah, I'm saying 6/6 because you have another creature that's attacking.
Oh,
Not,
sure. Yeah.
But I did phrase that poorly. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in general, like I think the fact that a lot of these aggressive experience creatures also happen to synergize really well with the kind of green, white, X +1/+1 counter aggro shells that people have been, playing, definitely bodes well for these cards. So I think like they are naturally pretty well positioned in the context of our format.
Yeah, speaking of another aggressively oriented experience card, Eager Hatchling. So you want to talk about this one, Dodger?
Sure. Yeah. So Eager Hatchling is a 1-mana 0/1 experience. When it hits the 3 or more +1/+1 counters, it transforms into a 4/5 flying. Um, this is a pretty comparable card to Primal Ruffian in some ways. In that it's very, very good if you stick it on turn 1 and drops off pretty hard after that. Primal Ruffian is a bit less all in, but like you really need this to come down on turn 1 for it to be the 1-mana 4/5 flyer that you are hoping for. Because like later in the game, even if it doesn't need a removal spell, it can be hard to attack in with a 1/2 and like have that live. But of course, this gets better if you are running ways to put counters on it, like Katie or Anomalion or Ryan Bay Admiral or Splinter of Realities or whatever other shenanigans you're trying to do. So overall, I think this probably gets there in some decks. Probably won't make the cut in others that maybe want a bit more staying power, but yeah, overall, I'm a fan.
Yeah. The card I compared this to was Core Sky Knight, which I haven't seen run in a while, but is a card that has historically seen MSEM play, at least when the form was like less developed in green-white counters lists. And I think being able to run a higher density of 1-mana experience creatures is just kind of good for those density-based synergy decks that are just trying to execute a game plan as consistently as possible. And a 4/5 flying is a really scary threat that's a pain in the ass to kill, and it kills people pretty quickly.
Yeah, especially when you only spend 1 mana for it.
Yeah, so I don't think this card's going to change the meta by any means, but it's a useful tool to have access to in many of these decks. Um,
Okay, and so moving on, I think recently we've seen a buff to a very powerful piece of 2 mana white removal, namely Journey's End. Um, I, and I think this is another card which will help push the envelope in terms of making white removal just as attractive as black removal. And this is Event Horizon. So it's 1 and a white for an instant. Exile target non-land permanent if its converted mana cost is less than or equal to the number of non-land permanents on the battlefield.
yeah, so I think the thing that's really interesting about this card is it scales in two different directions. It scales the wider your opponent's board has gone, and it scales the wider your board has gone. And scaling off of non-land permanents is a big deal because it means that the dark bargains you have lying around, the dead man's parties, whatever, those are all counting up and up and up. One thing that we've seen kind of with the result of Journey's End and Pithbolt becoming the de facto removal spells is cards that dodge both of those things are suddenly seeing more play and are seeming much, much scarier when they stick. So things like Glitch Galactic Muse
Helene
manage to
Strand.
dodge. Yeah, those dodge. Well, Helene Trent can still be hit by Pithwell.
We're talking more like the Zanigans.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, fair enough.
The 5+ mark, like 5 mana, yes, can get hit, but it's vastly less likely. I think 4 mana is just like you're still in range. But I agree, like Howling Tran is a good example. But like the thing is, once you are a planeswalker and you are higher than 4 CMC, you kind of become invincible to removal, other than things like demon worthy. But even like in control decks, like your cursory glances don't tag them. Most of those are multicolored, so your destructive ambitions don't tag them. So you're kind of unraveling your bust. And all that's really exciting because Event Horizon isn't like stone cold stellar versus those cards, but I think it gives you more game against them than Pithwell does, and I think Exile is a non-zero factor here. I I have seen Journey's End's downside of tucking come up, where someone was then able to just tutor the creature up again. I've seen,
yeah, Journey's End is actually really bad for Spotlight, I think.
Yeah, and I've also seen the Scry 1 just ruin someone's life. So the fact that this doesn't give your opponent anything in return, but it just has a targeting restriction, makes me really interested in it. But I think one of the things I really like about this design is you have to be building around it, or it'll only be good in very specific matchups.
Yeah,
So
I don't think it's
here's my pitch:
Okay.
Sadistic Indulgence turn 1, and then for the rest
Nope.
of the game, this hits
Nope.
this hits anything with CMC 5 or less. Am I right,
I mean,
fellas?
if you're a Sadistic Indulgence deck that runs white, like this is probably a
Yeah,
decent
but also if you're a Sadistic Indulgence deck, please don't be. No, but it's good. But also, I'm just saying, please don't be because they scare me.
I think there are two decks where this shines, and it's basically any aggro deck and any kind of like permanent base control. So like Concord absolutely loves this because you're running out like your Sights Beyond and I don't know, generating you're like casting wheat from chaff or whatever. And I also think that like uh Enchantress decks like Dark Bargain obviously love this. But you shouldn't run this in like your random like blue-white control because then if you're just relying entirely on your opponent, it's way too variable compared to something more consistent like Journey's End.
I don't think aggro decks should be running this, but I also don't think aggro decks should be running removal that doesn't go face in general. So that's
if
more
you're
of a
like
meta
I think
level
it depends on your
conversation.
flavor of like if Lone Survivor is technically aggro, then I could see that argument.
But non-creature spell.
This isn't great in Lone Survivor, but like if you're like a white weenie deck that isn't running red, I could definitely see it.
I think the
Or like a
question is
tokens
like,
deck.
is there any reason to be white weenie solely? And I don't think there is right now, but there could be in the future.
I think I mean, you don't have to be like just straight up white, but like I
And the
think
council unbans the white soul land and none of the other ones.
Yeah, so anyways, yeah, when that happens January 1st, Event Horizon, look out for it.
All right, next card.
Yep, this
Gym
one.
Leader.
Yeah, go ahead, Pip.
It's a 1 and a white 2/2, a hate bear. We love those stat lines. No more than one creature can attack each combat. No more than one creature can block each combat. We've seen Silent Arbiter effects before. This is a pretty cheap one. I don't think it's like a stellar one, but I think it's a fine one.
Yeah, I think how it
These
ends
sorts of
up
effects are not
happening
good
is
in MSEM.
yeah. I think you play this in MSEDH, and if you want this kind of effect in MSEM, you play what is it, Gao Wu? I think
Yeah.
that's the name. But yeah,
No,
this was
Gawu is
just
much better than this.
yeah, this is just a quick shout out for like MSEDH players out there. Keep an eye on this.
There's also a lock with this plus Whispering Halls, which I know Cajun was a little bit concerned about. That's also legal in Cajun Standard if anyone has interest in playing Designer Standards. But I don't think that gets there in MSEM.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. So for our last white card, we have Jovial Martyr. It's a pretty standard.
But we have two more though, right?
Huh? Oh yeah, wait, no, we have two more. I'm just blind. Sorry,
Okay.
second to last one. So Jovial Martyr is a pretty standard Boros Reckoner effect, but I believe, if my instigator search was right, it's our first Boros Reckoner effect, which obviously then opens up lots of potential synergies.
You're correct. I have searched for Boros Reckoners before, and have been disappointed.
So yeah, I think
Isn't there the Hound one?
Oh, okay. Also, the fact that this is bias source and opponent controls is a really, really important distinction when we're looking at Boros Reckoners, because we do, for instance, have a 1 mana deal 20 to all creatures. It does have a couple of hoops for anyone curious, but
yeah, it kind of, I think that kind of kills the combo potential with this card, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't think you can combo kill with this card. Someone might
I remember
wrong,
like Blasphemous Act Boros Reckoner combos, and those were like actually kind of super relevant a lot of the time. So I don't know. I think like you can keep an eye on this, but I think the fact that it's opponent controls makes it kind of dead in my eyes. I don't know.
Yeah,
Like
that's fair.
it's not the worst blocker versus creature aggro decks, I guess, because like this beats up on 3/3s really hard, for instance. Which, you know, like I could maybe see like you sideboarding this if the meta gets to like some weird spot where everyone's just running mono 3 power aggro.
Butt fighting?
Yeah, it's not bad butt fighting. Maybe. You never know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and now for our actual last white card for realsies. Kevin, do you want to take this one?
Sure. Perish Song. So 1 mana, your opponent can't play creatures for the next 3 turns.
Oh no! That's Stonewood Sanctuary. Different set.
Yeah, apologies. No, yeah, Perish Song. Yeah, enters with 3 counters, and it ticks down, and when you remove the last one, you just wipe the board. I know there's been talk of this being changed, but I can't speak too much to that. But yeah, this card, like if you're any kind of mid-range deck that wants to play to the board, this just shuts you down.
I mean, it is a telegraph board wipe. Like if you're Podlight or something, you can still tutor up a Pithwill or tutor up a Default Reclaimer and just answer it. It's a thing you need to answer, but like it's not a hard lock by any means.
Yeah, it's not a flesh rot where you get immediate value when you play it and then it sticks around.
We've had a similar card in the format, I think, since the format's inception, or at least close, which was 1 and a white and it enters with force, but it blows up all non-land permanents. And that card has been genuinely horrible every time someone's tried to play with it. So it's a little bit weird to me that just changing 2 of those numbers makes this card good. I dislike it partially because it is a board wipe that is really bad at being a board wipe when you need it to be, and it's only really good if you like play it out preemptively and give your opponent the ability to play around it. But like, I don't know, it's just so hard to look at and have a strong understanding of how it works, because if you play it on turn 1, it pops off on your turn 4, right?
Yeah.
Because turn 2, turn 3. So if you're on the draw, that's too slow versus burned. They will have just killed you or put you in like bolt range.
I mean, so rats aren't really good versus burn anyway, though.
Yeah,
right?
I don't disagree, but I'm saying like if part of what we're selling this as is it's like a 1 mana board wipe that locks your opponent out, I think it's important to remember that it's not.
So I
And
think that
even
this
in the
is
enchantment synergy decks, I feel like you play again. Like I think Flesh to Rot does lots of what this card promises.
Like, great. Well, may not great. It's a decent legend weaving target.
I
I
kind of
mean, is it
disagree.
though?
I
Yeah,
think
like
that
the
the
earliest
legend
you can
weaving
get it with
part
Legend
helps
Weaving
defend
is
that.
turn 3.
So here's why I think this card is good. It's actually a fairly big tempo play because the turn that this blows up, right? You can actually drop your finisher in the same turn, so you could be running some kind of like base blue white control deck and uh be able to play a wrath and a glitch in the same turn. Which that's one of Glitch's weaknesses, right? It's like she's not very good at dealing with established boards. Um, but Perish Song kind of covers that weakness, and I also think that if you drop it early in the game, it kind of puts your opponent in an awkward position because if they do play into it, then like you get the choice of whether or not you want to use your removal. And you as the control player can choose to sacrifice however much life you want to get your 4 for 1 or 3 for 1 or whatever. And if they don't play into it, then it kind of just buys you 3 free turns where now you've got your counter magic set up. So I think that this is the kind of card that goes very well into decks that um, index heavily on 1 for 1s and decks that might also have ways to loot this away or filter it out if you draw it later in the game because it's not a good play on turn 6.
Yeah, I
I
feel
think
like this wants to be Swords of Revealing Light more than it actually is.
I think the looting might be a really good line because that's not something I'd considered. Since I generally try to play decks with as few replacement level cards at various stages of the game as possible. Um, but I I get the idea of why this card is powerful, and I think it is possible to engineer a ton of those situations. But I think it is just the sort of effect where you you have less control over how powerful this card is than you kind of need. Like your opponent's deck composition, how your opponent plays into it, when you draw this, how you can sequence around it. All of those things are really variable.
Yeah, and I also think it's very awkward that the two strongest removal spells in the format happen to hit this.
Yep.
Which means that your opponent will probably have a way to like next 2 turns play creatures, and then 2 turns later, oh, just kill this so you don't get your wrath. Like, and you can maybe protect it with counter magic too. But like the fact that that could just happen to you is something that's going to make it a lot harder to take advantage of it. So I
And
think
it
it's
can
an
happen.
interesting card. I'll need to play with it to be sure, but
It
I
can
can see it
happen
going either
even
way.
as late as the turn it's meant to go off. Like as long as they kill it before you remove the last counter, even if it's in your upkeep, you don't get anything. You can have spent
True.
3 turns like sculpting a game plan around this, and then if you have to counter it, you actually kind of lose a lot of this card's power because you were talking about like it allows you to like set up this turn 5, and if your opponent says on your upkeep, I'm going to try to destroy that with Pithwilt. Now you need to decide: am I going to stick glitch this turn, or am I going to counterspell and just break up my tempo and
So here's what you
effectively
do.
just yeah.
Here's what you do. You have um, Witch's Invocation in play. You cast your glitch in response, and then you cast whatever it takes.
Nice, nice,
What?
fucking nailed it.
Okay.
Free
Should we
counter.
go
This is
on to
why
blue?
all free counter magic is broken busted. Okay. But yeah,
All
speaking of
right.
counter magic, you know what works really well with it? Callback. It's 1 in a U for an instant, which allows you to cast target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard. It's basically it's kind of like Snapcaster except without the body, basically.
It's almost exactly Snapcaster without the body.
So it
Right?
has the upside of allowing you to cast cards for alternate costs, which is kind of a sweet gig.
Neat.
And also, if those cards dissolve anywhere other than a graveyard, they actually get to resolve there, unlike with Snapcaster.
That's true.
But this plus Cane Dancer allows you to build your own Snapcaster mage, which is sweet. Everyone loves that. I don't think this card is like nuts, to be clear. I think it's going to frequently be worse than Whisperwood Exploration.
Mm.
I still think it's probably worth keeping an eye on because this is an effect that has been costed at a competitive rate and is something that historically decks have been interested in. So I could see a blue-white deck picking up like 1 or 2 copies of this, for instance.
Yeah, I think this card's pretty sweet. I'm not sure if it will compete with the cards that are sort of already in this slot, but I mean, if someone tries it out, I won't like blame them or anything.
Personally,
The next,
I'll be putting the heads of whoever try this. I'm gonna put them on pikes outside my house. They're-
Okay.
Yeah.
the next card's one I put on the list because it's really interesting. It's a sort of card I'm really bad at building around, though. So we have Compulsive Patrol, which is 1 blue sorcery. Draw 3 cards, then discard 2 cards unless you return a permanent you control to its owner's hand. So, obviously, 3 mana, draw 3, discard 2, not traditionally a very playable effect.
It's
However,
like yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
3 mana, draw 3, discard no cards is very good at 3 mana. And unlike something like Thirst for Meaning or Thirst for Knowledge, this isn't draw 3 then discard 2 unless you discard one specific thing. It is just you don't need to discard anything unless you take a tempo hit. And if you can use that tempo hit in any way, like in the late game, you bounce a land. If you didn't have a land to play, great, you have a land to play. Like, it kind of paid for part of itself. You can bounce a planeswalker that you don't have the ability to defend on board anymore. You can
Or even
reset
like early on,
Dark
can you
Bargain.
imagine like, yeah, exactly. I was thinking you play turn 1 Dark Bargain, you play this turn 3, so you end up drawing like 6 cards total when you play your Dark Bargain again next turn. It's just like, oh, okay, cool. That was just good for me. Thanks.
You can do the same thing with Terraformers Globe too.
Oh
Oh
my
yeah.
god, Terraformers Globe is also really funny with this. The main thing that really made this stick out to me is there was a canon magic card from Amon Cap block, Hour of Devastation, which had Capnet and a really sad flavor text. I don't remember anything else, but
Kefnet's
it was
last.
a kind of,
Oh no, never mind. I remember. It was common.
yeah.
It was like this, but draw 2 cards, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that card is like, fringe. But I did once see a Penny Dreadful deck that looped that plus Mystic Sanctuary.
Yeah.
And I think we in the MSEM Council have been very good at not printing lands that can do that. But the second you get into a late game engine state where like, cool, I'm gonna play this, I'm gonna bounce my like Raw Hits Prodigy, I'm gonna play Raw Hits Prodigy, and I'm gonna rebuy my Compulsive Patrol. You have an engine that control decks are gonna have an impossible time muscling through. And the fact that this is a good engine card that you can also just fire off in the early game, as just a like really good card selection spell, or to reset a Terraformers Globe or something like that, just makes me really high on it conceptually.
Yeah, I think the fact that it's a 3 mana sorcery kind of makes me wonder how much of the time it's going to be better than Worlds Away.
I mean,
that's my one qualm with it, I guess.
I
Yeah,
think the
I think
difference is
World's
that like
Way-
it's just nice and cheap.
I think World's Way just has a different niche now, that it's like effectively a 5 mana, it's now like just a Tidings on crack. But I think
Wait, I always forget which is the current version of Worlds Away.
the current version is you can cast it as an instant as long as you have
Oh,
Wanderlust.
okay. I thought it was
It's a
the
5-drop.
cost 2 less version. Okay, never mind.
Yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
The cost 2 less version, I still think this like kind of comes close because you can fire it off on turn 3 potentially.
Right.
But like I agree, I think that's a way closer comparison. The question is whether you can turn the downside that this has into an actual factual upside.
I think there
and
are
I think
plenty of ways you can do that.
Yeah, and that's why I'm kind of high on this.
Cool. All right, next card.
Yeah, and I think the next card is absolutely one of the coolest cards in the set, and it's hard not to be when you're being an XP of Mewtwo. It's End of Monsters, which for 3 blue and a blue, gives you a 5/7 with Omniscience. Pretty good. Of course, it unfortunately restricts it so that each player can only cast 1 spell per turn. But if you're free casting spells, you'll often be casting the bigger thing. Is the rationale. So quite a threat.
Yeah, it's also very powerful if you're casting things at instant speed, because then every opponent's turn you get an extra spell cast. So if you're using like instant speed card draw, or counter magic or stuff like that, counter magic in particular is really good because if your opponent plays their one spell, well, you can just cast your free counter spell, and then bada bing, bada boom, they can't cast any more spells that turn, no matter what, right? So this card can actually kind of lock people out if you do get it set up with like a grip full of counter magic. As we saw in so I played an EDH game where this was one of the commanders, and it absolutely terrorized that game in particular.
I think one thing that's really interesting about this card is the fact that, so if anyone played with Wilderness Reclamation, not Wilderness Reclamation, the other broken card of that standard, Fire's Invention, one of the things that you picked up is if you're casting spells for free and can't also cast them while paying their mana costs, you end up with a bunch of extra lands lying around. And I think one of the really important things for properly harnessing this card's full power level is finding non-spell things to do with your mana. So whether that's activate Nareva to draw a bunch of extra cards, or cycle things, especially cycling cards that have cycle triggers.
Activate Unified Theory 6 times.
Activate Unified Theory 6 times. Those all really help make this card more nuts. I think this card's really awesome. I'd be really concerned about registering it because you're just in kind of the worst state possible if you play this and your opponent has a removal spell because you can't defend it the turn it comes down. But if they can't answer it immediately, if you get to go to their turn, now you can freely cast counter magic, and you will probably get to untap with this. And if you get to untap with this, you can obviously do some ludicrous stuff.
Yeah, I think that the kind of deck where you try to do the counter magic lock is probably too clunky for MSEM, but it absolutely was not when we played it in EDH. So it will at the very least shine there.
If you want everyone to have a fun and wholesome experience in EDH, bring this a whole host of counter magic and Unified Theory. Everyone at your table will love you.
And they definitely won't clamor for its ban one game after it's been played.
Yeah, not speaking from experience or anything. So our next card is another powerful, expensive blue card. It's I Choose You. And it's 7 mana for a Planeswalker bribery, or Planeswalker or creature bribery. You might hear that that's cool and all, but it seems a little expensive.
I'm pretty sure this is a 3-drop.
Exactly, because of Harness. So do you want to talk about what Harness does?
Yeah, so we mentioned Harness earlier, but you can tap a creature you control to reduce the spell's mana cost by that creature's power. If you're familiar with the set Harvest Festival, Harness is just Harvest, but you can only do one creature instead of as many creatures as you want, which also meant Cajun has gone a little buck wild with some of the designs. The really notable thing is we do have Frostwalker in MSEM, so you can actually curve 1-drop, 2-drop, I Choose You. And the cheaper you're casting this card for, the better. I think as long as you're casting this as a 4-drop or less, it's kind of nuts. Bribery is not really a card that exists outside of Cube, but there's plenty of matchups where it's really good, since it's just, it's a threat. Planeswalker Bribery is way better in MSEM because even most of the control decks run Planeswalkers. This is not very good at grabbing Glitch, as a brief note, but most other Planeswalkers pretty good at grabbing.
Can you imagine using this to grab an opposing Ciesa and then just grabbing 2 more cards?
One of which is another I Choose You.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that just reminds me of the really weird GP experience I had where both my opponent and I had Ciesas post board. And so the first Ciesas, first thing is grabbing 2 more Ciesas. Highly recommend never playing that sort of mirror.
I think I'm a little sus on this because just because the output that you get is so variable. And if you're building around this card, it's the kind of thing where your deck is going to be using a lot of real estate to make sure this is castable for a small amount of mana. And if I'm doing that, I want my payoff to be something that I can more consistently win games with. And I just think that there are plenty of matchups where even if you cast your I Choose You and you get like, I don't know, like a Snowfield Mother or something, or like whatever the top threat is in someone's deck, like can you imagine casting this against Burn? Like that is just so ludicrously bad. I just think that like maybe it's a sideboard plan if your deck happens to already have cards that can proc it easily. But otherwise, I'm
Yeah, the problem is like unless you're somehow for some reason color tight, I feel like Ciesa is just the more consistent version of this out of the side. But yeah.
I don't know. I feel like the fact that it puts into play is like a fairly real difference. Like,
yeah,
in terms of just having the
5
tempo,
CS
that's
too.
fair.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't
like
think this really compares to Ciesa. They're different cards.
I mean, I
But,
think
I
I think
mean,
the
I
role I'm talking about the role of okay, I'm just gonna yoink your win cons, and because we're both like relatively win con light.
I agree that if the best thing you have to grab here is a Snowfield Mother, this card's bad. I think what you want to be doing is casting this for 3 or 4 mana and generating 5 or 6 mana. And ideally grabbing the sort of threat that your opponent put in their deck because either A, they want to win the mid-range mirror, or B, because they wanted a very resilient threat. So one thing that you'll notice is most control threats dodge all of their interaction because they built their deck in such a way that their threats are kind of immune to any symmetrical effects, and they picked threats specifically because they were as effective as possible in the face of other interaction. So a large percentage of control decks just don't have a plan if this resolves and grabs their Xanagan. They can't beat their own Iviana. And of course, versus like decks like Podlight or whatever, if you turn 3 grab Leyrin Alpha, they're not dead. Like they can still beat that, but their life just monumentally harder. But I agree that like it's abysmal versus Burn. It's really mediocre versus aggro decks that top out at like they might have a 4 mana 5/5 or something as their top end. But I think this is a card that just if you're predicting a specific type of meta where everyone's either valuing or controlling, this card's great, and I think it is worth abusing if you can figure out a way to do so.
Yeah, that's fair. I think it's a sideboard card in that case. I would be very sus on main decking it unless aggro is just actually unplayable.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
The next I want to talk about is Onigori, Emma's Shield. This is a card that is just kind of the embodiment of rudeness. As we clearly demonstrated, is not the rudest blue legendary creature in this, but it does its job. So I don't know if the version you're seeing on your screen is actually the version that's going to end up being live, because I'm not sure which one you grabbed.
It is not. So this is the unchanged version. So the new one is actually, Pip, can you read that out? I don't remember it off the top of my head.
Yeah, so it is instead of your land straight up don't untap, it is you can only untap 2 permanents, period. So it's a kind of one-sided static orb. I don't think this card's actually that good. Like, it's definitely bad in MSEM because it's just a 5 mana 5/5 that's a little bit harder to remove, but it still bites to every board wipe, still bites to Exune, etc., etc. Pithwill, well, not Pithwill, but like Journey's End is a 4 mana removal spell, but that's actually still tempo positive. If it hits, it's good, but it also doesn't lock. It doesn't tap down their lands. It just means that if they tapped out for something, they're a little bit screwed. But if they tapped out for something, this shouldn't be able to hit them. So I think the main thing this card is good for is griefing EDH tables. I'm not convinced it's that great.
Yeah, I think Cajun really said, blue is the color that people hate in Eternal formats, right? And went in on that.
This is an accurate assessment. This next card's a really weird niche, but it actually is kind of valid. So Rest is 1 blue, instant, target non-land permanent phases out, draw a card. So there's nothing particular busted you can do with this except Casino Scam and similar combo decks traditionally ran one copy of Lost in Smoke, I think is what it was called. Um, yeah, Lost in Smoke. And this is just Lost in Smoke, but better, since it's like Lost in Smoke, but you also get to cantrip. You can cast it in like a circumstance where you're like worried that you don't have the resources to go off to pick up another card and help you. It's like it's not a card that you want to main deck, and it's not a card that's a slam dunk. It's not a general staple, but it's a card for specifically combo decks that have vulnerabilities that they think are going to be targeted via permanent based hate.
I think the comparison you can make is this and like Echoing Truth or Chain of Vapor in Legacy Storm decks.
Yeah.
Kind of a similar niche.
The other thing that's notable is since it phases out, if you cast it in someone's anytime during someone's turn, they're not gonna get it until they get to untap. So you can cast it let's say they have a hate bear that you can't combo off through. One of the things that storm decks and similar types of decks will sometimes struggle with is they have to take hits from those cards that they wouldn't want to take, because if they bounce them, their opponent just replays them during their next main phase. Whereas this, you can still just it kind of incidentally also gains a couple of life if you're using it against a creature, I guess is my point.
Yeah, that's neat.
Has a neat little niche. Not as exciting as the next card, though.
Also, I'm an idiot, and I realized I had my mic muted in OBS for all of that. So, oops. But basically,
Okay, so
one of the what you missed was me saying that this is one of the best cards in the set.
Yep.
Um,
Notably, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Okay, so I was just gonna say, notably, the Delver comparison is a little different because Delver oftentimes transforms on turn 2, whereas this will basically never do that.
Yeah, there's lots of people, when we posted this on Reddit, lots of people going, does anyone else strictly better Delver? And it's not. It's strictly worse, but it's still very strong.
It's not strictly worse. I mean, it's +1/+1.
We're not doing this, Dodger.
Well, it's not even close to strictly worse. That's the thing.
It's strictly different.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, the thing is, you usually want Delver for its ability to flip early, so I guess just in that regard.
I think one of the really important things, though, is this has fewer deck building restrictions than Delver does. As a Delver pilot, the fact that Delver says, if you play more than 12 creatures, you're kind of a joke. Because 12 creatures plus 18 lands, that's half your deck. Delver's flipping 50% of the time is a really bad rate. You really want Delver to be flipping 60+% of the time. I've had to tie myself into knots to try to figure out some of that math sometime, especially once you start adding cards like Oko. The fact that scuttling that, as long as you've done the setup work before you play the Nat, it's online. So you cast a Oracles in the early game. You do a couple of interaction spells. You slam 2 Nats on turn 3, and they flip, and you swing for 8 on turn 4. That's really spicy. I think the fact that you can't get busted aggro starts out of it, though, means you have to do a slightly different approach to how you're going to play this card. I also think something people are going to fuck up a lot is they're going to try to play this alongside just a critical density of other graveyard effects, like playing this alongside Hunter's Hideout or Unearthed Legion or Bitter Duckling or whatnot. I think that's kind of a mistake. Inish 2. Well, not Inish 2, because
Inish 2 is actually also a good threat in its own right.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really important to remember is 6 or more cards is nothing. Unlike a lot of those other threats where you really can kind of need to turbo mill yourself to enable, 6 cards you can get via a fetch land, an Oracle's Vision, and a single kill spell. And congrats, you can have this online on turn 2 if you do that. Or replace the kill spell with any cantrip or a second fetch land. Like, this thing's trivial to turn on, and I think that's a big part of why it's good. If you start putting too much graveyard reliant stuff together, you end up in circumstances where your opponent can cast Memento Mori, and suddenly your entire board state dies. Don't let that happen to yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I still think that there are probably plenty of decks where both this and Bitter Duckling want to go in.
That's probably fair.
And I think like if you're running a tempo deck where like your threat base is Nat, Duckling, and Ishtu, like that's totally fine. Especially if you have counter magic to kind of deal with the Memento Moris of the world.
I don't super like that approach because I think a tempo deck where your threats are all, or like you have 2/2 drops, you're relying on threats, on as threats, you have a 1-drop that's not live until turn 3. Like, I think one of the things that I'm starting to realize is you need to be you're probably better off being like an aggressively slanted mid-range deck or something rather than like a classic tempo deck. But I agree. I think the fact that Ishtu is just so good on his own means that Ishtu plus Nat are going to be best friends, and it's possible that Duckling is just like the third best threat to go alongside those other two.
Right.
Mostly, I'm just saying, please don't go all in on this plan because I've seen people do that before, and it kind of sucks.
I think the key point from what you just said is that you don't have to be all in to make this card good.
Yeah.
You just need you need a deck that their general game plan is going to be getting cards into the graveyard at a reasonable rate. If you're running Oracle's Vision, that probably helps a lot. Run fetches, they're good. Stuff like that. You know, like you don't have to run bad cards to make this card good.
Like Monkey Shines is a reasonable card, and it
Also
represents
true.
3 cards going to your graveyard. So if you do Monkey Shines plus 2 fetch lands plus a single kill spell, you can have, like, let's say you do turn 1 Monkey Shines off a fetch land. You do turn 2 fetch land, cast Twilight Ambush, kill your opponent's other creature, play Nat. Your Nat's going to flip on turn 3, and that took almost 0 effort. Like, we're not contriving into these like weird circumstances where you manage to draw 2 of your mill cantrips or something. It's like we're just saying play good cards and you can have good cards.
The one other thing I want to say is that it's hilarious how this actually just totally screws over the Thuum deck, which is just kind of funny. It's also immune to Dovazire, which is I'm pretty sure that's going to come up sometime, and someone's going to cast Dovazire targeting this, and then they're going to be like, WTF? Why does it have Pro Dragons? And then we have to explain the Twitch plays Pokemon reference.
Yeah.
God, I really don't look forward to the GP finals when that happens.
I also love the Metamorph's eyes because I swear to God, it looks like someone photoshopped googly eyes onto it.
Venomoth has the unfortunate, just lived experience of that.
Now that you mention it, I can't unsee it.
Because everything else is so like hyper detailed, and then it's just like 2 circles. Speaking of other things which are silly, I think the name of this next one is definitely cheeky. This is like
Kevin's pick, right?
Huh?
This is like Kevin's pick, right?
Oh yeah, it's Seal of Approval. So Kevin, do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, so Seal of Approval, blue, first 2/2 seal, flash, great. Blue, sack it, counter target spell unless its controller pays 2. So I really like this as a side thing to Vengeful Messenger. Slightly different. It does not have flying, but you are able to do things like block tokens, get it out turn 2, counter a creature, which in a deck that doesn't have the best removal for killing things that high up, like larger creatures, being able to have an onboard way to hold off creatures is so valuable.
What I like is I like the fact that this plays really well with Cursor Glance, because if you have this on board, right, your opponent is more likely to cast their cheaper spells, because this kind of just puts a hard lock um, on their 4 and 5 drops and kind of turns them into really expensive removal spells. But this way, not only do you get to beat down with it and tax um, their finishers to the point of uncastability, but you also force them to play their lower cost cards that just get snapped up by Cursory Glance. So I think the best scenario for this deck is either in a tempo deck where it runs Cursory Glances, or in some kind of Monument to the Fallen Man style deck, where you can like slap this in for free, maybe counter something right now, maybe not, maybe you just leave it up. Maybe you're running Theocracy or something, and you want another good 2-drop to hit that gives you a little more utility. I think this card is pretty good. Should have its niches.
Yeah, I think this is a card that I'm gonna have trouble like really evaluating until I see in practice, because the difference between a Quench and a Force Spike, which other similar cards have been traditionally, is kind of night and day. Like comparing this to Curse Catcher or Dreadful Familiar just straight up doesn't work.
Yeah.
You need to look at how Vengeful Messenger plays, but I think the fact that Vengeful Messenger doesn't require you to hold up mana around it, but you probably would be holding up mana anyway. It's a 3-power flyer, but this can hit creature spells. I just think it's it's really hard for me to say one or the other.
One thing I will also say is this is a list where basically everything in it is 2 mana, so you do find yourself with like just a spare blue for an entire game. So I do think holding that blue is not that much of a cost.
That really hasn't been my experience with Monument decks. Like, if you build your Monument decks right, you end up incredibly mana hungry because you don't run too many lands. Yeah, like
Sorry, no, I didn't mean Monument decks. I meant more like Flash Tempo, like Portal Fracture, Cursory Glance lists.
I still think that Monument decks, depending on how you build them, like you probably don't throw this in like a Suzume Monument deck, but there are other Monument decks out there.
Yeah, I mean, you can get some stupid locks going with not Suzume, who's the new one, Shinrei of the Ghosting Way.
It's good with Shinrei. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think this card is bad by any means. I just think it's a card that you can, like, being a 2/2 ground creature makes this thing kind of useless in creature-based matchups.
Right.
But
so maybe it's better suited as a sideboard card.
Yeah, maybe. I could see that.
Also, I mean, we didn't mention the pun, but I absolutely love the pun.
Oh yeah,
Wait, that's why it started off on. That's why I was saying it's a silly name.
I think that Cajun just kind of nails puns in basically every set that he makes, and this is no exception.
Ooh, can I do the next one?
Absolutely. Go for it.
All right. So next card, we've got Tide Pool Turtle. And this is the first of a cycle of 3 different cards, which represent the starters from the Kanto region of Pokemon. And the first one is Tide Pool Turtle. So it's a 2 mana 2/2 with experience, and then when it has 3 or more +1/+1 counters on it, you remove them all, transform it into a 5/8 with hexproof, and whenever it attacks or transforms into Tsunami Titan, you can bounce a creature. So obviously, like we kind of went over this earlier with the white experience creatures, but investing only 2 mana for a 5/8 hexproof that bounces something every turn is like obviously insane. You're kind of getting Sign of Torrents levels of board dominance in that case, although like this is worse than Sign of Torrents, except for the fact that it only costs 2 mana. I like this a lot in theory, but I'm a little concerned that I'm not sure exactly what deck wants it.
Yeah, I think unlike the green and red ones, which I think have a lot more like a clear cut of like, oh, okay, this attacks as a 3/3, which is a fine place for this to be. Green, you get counter synergies. Red, you can go in and like maybe you use it as a substitute for Performer of Desire, and that kind of like it's aggressive, but it's not so aggressive that it doesn't mind playing this slow but explosive 2-drop, etc.
I think honestly, if we had to play paper MSEM, I would highly recommend just spec buying all of your Cadia Fallens right now, because like every single one of these experienced creatures feels just like that's the thing that just makes them broken. Like, if you can curve that any of these 2-drops into her, you get to just like kind of win the game on the spot. And Katie is a kind of reasonable card to include in a lot of aggressive decks to begin with. I think she's kind of underplayed, honestly. And so
Does this count as insider trading?
Yes, this absolutely counts as insider. I made Katie, so I'm not saying that I actually own 70,000 copies of her, just waiting to be sold. But yeah, I don't know. I agree in some senses, but I also don't feel like I feel like a blue-green tempo-ish aggro deck where you're hoping to play and then protect Tidespout Turtle or something like that. I don't know. It's a 2-drop. Maybe you do some dumb monument stuff. Like, I
like this as a Theocracy target.
yeah.
I think that Theocracy decks often want to run blue, but sometimes I'm a little stuck on exactly what blue 2-drops I want to get. I think this is a good one. If I'm looking to build with this card, that's probably where I go. But
I think
it would have to be more aggressive slant. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the other thing is the fact that Tsunami Titan has hexproof just is kind of a huge deal, because a lot of these creatures, when you manage to flip them, you don't want your opponent to say cool and then I kill spell it. Like,
Right.
now
Yeah.
I'm just gonna untap an out of body experience it. You've got one trigger, that's fine. The fact that they need to kill this before it flips changes a lot of dynamics about how they can play around it and to what extent you can pump fake them.
Honestly, when you do flip this, your opponent's only option is really just to board wipe it or race it. Like,
Yeah.
Or if it's
And
their
good
only
luck
way
racing
to
this thing.
evict it.
Yeah. And racing it is going to be kind of impossible too, because
Yeah.
they're getting a creature bounced every turn. But like, there's almost no scenario where this attacks and then gets multi-blocked. If your opponent has like a death touch creature somehow, that's going to get bounced. Like maybe some kind of like.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Bounce my Sign of Desolation. Go ahead. Dare you.
Yeah.
I mean, if you bounce a Scion of Torrents and there's nothing else out.
That's true.
Well, by the time
that's
this is legal, that will not be the case.
That's also true. Yeah, I mean, I think that this card is very cool, and it's worth taking a look at. I'm not sure that it will find an immediate home, but it's also the kind of thing where like eventually there will probably be enough pieces that like a green-blue counters deck makes sense, or blue-white Theocracy makes sense, or like however many other potential archetypes this could fit into. Like I think the individual power is there.
Yeah, and I also think this is the type of card that's kind of hype, so I assume people are going to keep it in mind and are going to try to break it whenever they can.
Yeah, for sure. All right, next card.
Yep, so next up we have Time Stands Still. It's 3 blue for an instant, you choose a permanent, and then you get to take an extra turn, but everything other than the chosen permanent phases out, which, first of all, amazing flavor, but second of all, how do you guys think this is going to be used mechanically?
I think it won't.
Yeah, okay.
Personally.
That's why I asked, because I was like, I don't know what to say here, so I'm just going to defer to what y'all have to say.
I guess, like, Valier, downtick, free cap this.
Yeah,
Finally,
maybe.
we found a way to make a in-play Valier powerful.
Yeah, I think that honestly, this basically just reads one of your creatures is unblockable, draw a card, play land, which is kind of a weak deal for 5 mana, I think.
I think one of the things that's neat about this is the fact it's an instant. So the main thing I can think of is you engineering scenarios where you can cast this on your opponent's end step, and you, like, I don't know, do something with a Planeswalker. But I agree, this card's a little loose.
What about something like, what if we get an effect like Barren Glory? That kind of combos with it, but also in a pretty inefficient way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great combo if you are paying.
Once the format gets big enough that we get our own Saffron Olive, then that's probably going to be sick.
Yeah, I think this card is like a very cool design. I just don't think it like actually does anything in MSEM. Even MSEDH is a bit dicey, I think.
I think it's better there because you can, like, making something unblockable is much better when you have commander damage. And
That's true.
it being an instant and allowing you to take an out of sequence turn is really interesting.
Yeah. Also, like each of your individual permanents just probably does more. Like in EDH,
Yeah.
like you can have some more like monstrous or ridiculous permanents that you're like, oh okay, I'm just gonna take an extra turn and I don't need anything else to win really. I just need this bad boy.
Yeah, it's fair enough. All right, next card.
Yep, and I think Dodger, you're the one who put this on the list, right? So
Oh yeah, that was me. So it's Trainer's Eyes. It's a 2-mana enchantment, and it has a Vanguard ability. Whenever a creature you control attacks alone, you draw a card. I think that this is a pretty easy to enable Phyrexian Arena variant. Um, I think that most tempo decks that are running kind of like a threat light plan of like, I'll drop a 1-drop or a 2-drop, and then kind of like just keep attacking with that. It probably has evasion. Investing something like this into it, 2 mana, if you draw at least 2 or 3 cards with it over the course of the next couple turns, I'd call that a win. I think it's definitely a bit loose in that, like, maybe you just want to run a planet far, far away or some other kind of like instant speed draw spell. But the fact that you can just drop this on turn 2 and then you never really have to worry about drawing cards again as long as you can protect and take a threat is something that I'm kind of interested in.
I want this to be good so bad.
Yeah.
I think the main comparison point is looking at something like Curiosity. Where this gets better is in the circumstance where your first creature gets removed.
Right.
I think part of the issue is you really don't want that circumstance to ever happen when you're playing a card like this.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's better in the worst case scenario, but that it's worse in every other case because it's 2 mana rather than 1. So I don't know. I'm really divided because I love curiosity effects. I love push curiosity effects. I can't tell if this counts.
I think one thing that might make this a little bit better is that like in board stalling situations, you can still just use this to draw cards and like get your way out of it.
Yeah, and
So
you
That's
don't
true.
need to connect with your creature.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Which
drawing
obviously if you're
drawing without
playing this
connecting
kind,
is a big deal.
yeah, obviously if you're playing this, you're likely gonna be running evasive threats and whatnot. But I can also see this in like blue green where maybe you run like Spore Flow or something, and you're like, God damn it, they have their own defensive creature. What do I do now? And it's like, oh no, okay, my Trainer's Eyes will still draw me cards. Or like maybe in a deck with like Inish 2, like we were talking about with the
Yeah,
earlier
I think
tempo deck.
I think there's a world where you want this as a sideboard plan. If you just have like in excess of if there's like a lot of board stalls and trading 1-for-1s and you just have an excess of tokens, like this is a great way to break that.
It's also it makes it so the circumstance where you have to like you swing in with your 4/4 and they double block. When you're trading that 4/4 for like 2/2/2s, it's not bad per se, but it's not like you definitely feel that. But if you also drew a card off it, that just like changes the math completely.
Yeah, that makes
Uh,
that scenario feel a lot better.
Especially when that 4/4 was a Snowfield Mother, and then you attack next turn with a 2/2 and draw another card. Like I don't know, this card, as I said, I really want this card to be good. I'm not sure if it will be, but I think we described enough circumstances where it's better than Curiosity that does make me feel a little more comfortable about it.
A card that
Yeah.
we know is definitely going to be good is our last blue card, Wash Away. So y'all ever want to Cyclonic Rift your opponent for 2 mana? This thing's got you covered. So in EDH, this thing is an absolute monster. Um, I don't think there's much to say about this other than like the blue. We've already showcased a bunch of amazing blue cards for EDH so far, and this is a fitting capstone to all of those.
I have a funny story with this card.
Okay, hit us.
So
But make it quick.
in my Mon EDH game night, I had a turn where Dropos drew a card and then said, "What the heck? I've never seen this card before." and then Dropos is like, "Wait, this is the perfect card for this specific situation." And then they cast Wash Away, which is a card from Surging Tide, which
Oh my
counters an
god.
activated or triggered ability. Because I believe so that card already exists in the format, so this is getting a name change. But Dravos had copy pasted their list,
The wrong
which
card.
had the name Walked Away.
Oh
Actually,
no.
it's a game.
God, that's so next level as fuck.
I know. Yeah. Anyway,
So-
that was just a funny story. But
we do have a couple of similar cards. There's let me see if I remember all of them. There's Spotless Mind, which is a 4-mana version that targets one player, but it has some conditions attached to it.
isn't there one where like you investigate 3 times?
That,
Blood and
yeah,
There's-
but for I think for specifically
I'm looking for like one-sided Psych Rift type
for
things.
Cyclonic Rift,
Like,
there's Lonely Journey, which is 7 mana instant speed, 1 player, and then
and there's
there's
Shatter Mortal Conveyances, which
Yeah.
is the really fucked up one.
yeah, that's
Like, I think
yeah.
this is worse
it's
than Shatter
it's a
Mortal
it's a
Conveyances.
coalesce card. Can we really be surprised that it's fucked up?
I think the fact that its base cost is 7 and not 10 mana means that I think this is the second best Psych Rift. I think Shatter Mortal Conveyances is still better. But I think one thing that Wash Away is good at is it's good at taking you in a position where you're ahead to being in a position where you're really ahead. And that's why it's going to be useless in MSEM, but it's why it's going to really upset people in MSEDH, because they're going to let their opponent have like an 8/8 hexproof trample, 7 different other keywords, and this is going to be cast for 2 mana at someone's end step, and people are going to be like, this card's broken. It's like, yeah, maybe. Maybe there's some other things going wrong here.
Yeah, that's EDH for you. But anyways, we were right before this card. We were talking about a 2-mana engine that draws you cards, and our first black card is very similar to that. It's From Beyond the Grave, where whenever a card leaves your graveyard for the first time each turn, each player loses 1 life and you draw a card. Now, of course, unlike Trainer's Eyes, there are a lot more interesting ways you can trigger this. And also you can trigger it on opponents' turns as well.
So yeah, this is my favorite card in the set. It is like the epitome of a Dodger build around, I think. Where it's like it kind of tells you what you want to do with it, but it's like open ended enough where there's a lot of like little synergies you can do. Right off the top of my head, I think you can just run this with cards that are good as well. Like Sacrificial Bull plus this does some pretty nasty things. I think that any kind of deck, maybe like you're running Tradition or just Whisperwood's Exploration, every time you do that, you draw an extra card. I think that's really well worth the investment of 2 mana, especially because you're also making your opponent lose life. Like, this can be a win condition if you're gaining life.
I will say the losing life thing is a really important thing to keep in mind, where I don't think this is a good enchantment to just hide behind, as you're going to just like 1-for-1 your opponent a bunch and bury them in value, because a lot of those decks really rely on winning by virtue of, just like using their life as a resource, and then winning when they're at like 5 to 10 life. And From Beyond the Grave really does not gel with that game plan. If you're playing a From Beyond the Grave deck, you kind of want to be able to outpressure your opponent in circumstances where you have to
very
use
fucked
it.
up with Sacrificial Bull and other similar Scooz variants.
Yeah, that's true.
Other things that it has non-zero synergy with that are good cards to run on its own are Dead Man's Party, Rogar's Frenzy,
Promethean.
Sanction, Promethean Grotto, any card with Flashback, any card with Coalesce.
Ryan of Desolation.
Yeah,
this probably doesn't want to go on the same deck aside from Desolation, but yeah.
I think part of the issue is some of these cards, like, okay, and now that your Sign of Desolation cantrips, now you're really going to bury them. It's like, yeah, that's not how that works.
Yeah, which is why I think Scoozes are like the best way to trigger this, because they put pressure on your opponents, so the life loss actually matters, and you have ways to repeatedly trigger them, starting on an early turn. So that's why I'm really high.
So that's part of why I love this card, is just because like there's a lot of like little challenges that it kind of or like a lot of little questions that you have to answer when you're building a deck card.
I think this is finally the time for Earthfeeder Worm to shine. If you don't know Earthfeeder Worm, it's a 1-drop Scooz. It has some disadvantages, but the most important thing is you can curve this into you can curve that into this into hold up interaction, as well as do Earthfeeder Worm things.
Oh, is this time for my Marrowraptor aggro deck to shine?
Absolutely. This is sick with Marrowraptor.
Yeah. All right.
Or oh god, okay, this is definitely overkill, and like we should probably move on. But what's that way card that already is like a 2 mana 2/1 draw
Yeah,
to
the one that
Ruined
draws two
Delver?
lands.
Really don't-
Yeah, this is neat with Ruined
Yeah,
Delver too. Yeah, why not?
yeah. Like
Yeah,
now,
and I think
now
that
you're
like
really starting to bury them.
yeah, I think that like when you've got Pip talking this way about a 2 mana do nothing enchantment, something has gone right in designing it.
I want nothing more than for 2 mana do nothing enchantments to be good in this format. I just feel so bad every time I play one and die immediately that I've just like hardened my heart to them. Anytime we're in set review season, I'm like, maybe this will be the day. Maybe I'll get to play Risen Raven in this format. Maybe I won't need to register 8 1 mana removal spells to feel safe tapping out for something. It's
I think
never that time.
I think at the very least you can just run this with Sack Bowl.
Yep.
Like
But
that's
yeah.
already very good.
But yeah, our next card is also another 2 mana a 2 mana draw engine that makes you lose life. It's Heartless Trainer, which it's Bob, but with an extra point of toughness, and its condition is if you have less life than an opponent, you lose 1 life and draw a card. So in Sweet Black decks, this is like kind of just a nut, but outside of there, you really have to, I feel like, justify it a little bit more, or like you have to have like some additional synergy to be able to consistently keep your life total low.
The main issue is we already have some really good Bobs. Like Imperial Confidant and Bloodbraid Ritualist were the two we just got. And before then, I really think Mismatch Bandit is kind of an underplayed card, and Sultan of Avarice is like kind of fucked up in aggro decks.
Sultan
So
Everest
the
is good, yeah.
yeah, so the question is like, does this do anything? Does this go into any aggro decks that none of those other ones can go into, or does this maybe change a mid range deck? The fact that it's on very easily, like as long as you've used more fetches than your opponent, it's probably on, is kind of nice. But as long as you're kind of under the effect of this, you really don't want to pressure your opponent too much. And
Yeah,
if you're
that's
not
why I
pressuring your
dislike
opponent too
this.
much,
Okay.
yeah, it's not
I,
like 2 mana 2/2 is not very good in those circumstances.
I dislike this in aggro for pretty much the reasons you said. Like a 2 mana 2/2 is not great to be done with, and also like it does disincentivize you from hitting your opponent unless you're kind of all in on the I'm gonna hit myself line. In which case, like your 2 drop slot is already pretty crowded because you're gonna be wanting to run Inked Summoner and the new black red creature who I
Yeah,
forget the name of. So like at that point, like are you a monument deck and you're just running mono 2 drops, or like at this point I think there's probably not room for this card in that deck. So I
I
kind
mean,
of see
hey,
this as like a mid-range threat,
it
essentially.
has synergy with Sultan of Avarice. That's kind of neat.
That's true. Yeah, I mean maybe there's like a different variant you can do.
Um,
Um,
I think in mid-range decks, the main issue is that Imperial Confidant is usually going to be better. Just because, like, yes, Imperial Confidant asks for a lot of deck building around it, but the kind of deck building restriction in MSEM is just play good cards, dumbass. Whereas this is like, you know what this is good in? This is good in a deck like Dark Canada, which is Hersey's old Mardu mid-range deck that was built around the assumption, and I know this because I've tried to play the deck and struggled a lot, and Hersey was like, I feel most comfortable when I am on the back foot and at low life and in like these really close circumstances. Then is when I play my best. So I just build my mid range decks to put me in that situation as fast as possible and then kill my opponent from it. And I can say this is really good in those sorts of decks, except for the fact that like you probably don't want this when you're at like 5 life, because you're gonna really feel the life loss at that point in time. But like when you're in the like 10 to 15 life range, this card's the nuts.
yeah, and I think the fact that it's a 2 mana, like a 2 drop, um, means that like I've tried to build a lot of different Theocracy decks, and one of the ones that I think might be something to do is like just kind of the bundle of like hit yourself creatures, so you can run Sultan of Avarice, the black red creature that I forget the name of, Inked Summoner, and then this also kind of goes in that package. So actually, now that I think about it, I think maybe that sort of like 2 drop Death Ball deck might actually work. Um, so yeah, I think there's probably a place where this can work. I just don't know if that deck itself will be competitive. Yeah, I don't know. Should we move on?
Yep. So next up we have Lucian's Trail.
Yeah, let's get to Lucian's Trail. So this card's just kind of, it's interesting. So for format, ETB, exile, target, creature, enchantment, opponent controls, not good enough. Sacrifice another permanent and becomes a copy of the exiled card until end of turn. Maybe that changes this? So this is kind of like a Chupacabra variant, except it's sometimes a mind control, except it costs you permanents for it to be a mind control. It's like, it's weird. I think this card's at its best when you can flicker it, or when you can abuse the fact it's a sack outlet. I would not have hated playing this as like a one of in like Esper Reflect, since being able to sack permanents so you can replay them with Reflect on Serenity is kind of sick.
Yeah, it seems
Like-
great. It's also not the worst legend weaving target, because
Yeah,
sometimes you might have like random extra enchantments lying around, or also just being able to 6-mana legend weaving for a removal spell is also kind of nice. The fact that it
and
hits enchantments too is sweet, because like mono
Yeah.
black decks usually don't have answers for enchantments.
yeah, that's
So,
something that I'm a little bit worried about, because that is a, and this might get a little too meta, so we can potentially cut this
Yeah,
off. But
I think we can basically just say like black
it's a
getting
decision that-
enchantment removal is a little dicey, and also fuck Watsy's push for that. Boom.
Right. And to get a little bit more specific about like why it's dangerous, so in canon magic, it doesn't actually matter that much because most enchantments are like nowhere near constructed playable. That's like somewhat started to shift, but not really. So like historically, the only issue with black not being able to answer enchantments is like, well, if your opponent plays a Bitter Blossom or a Sylvan Library, now you're fucked. But in MSEM, not being able to hit enchantments is a really big deal because of how many like engine enchantment decks we have, and how many decks where like they will play enchantments to lock you out of playing your game or whatever. And one of the big issues with Black Red Villainy historically was it had no good way of answering a Guiding Light. Like if someone stuck a Guiding Light and you had built your deck incorrectly, i.e., you were Black Red Villainy, you just lost the game on the spot. This kind of means those decks just still get to play Magic. Like, they're still in a bad spot. They can't cast Hand Attack, a lot of their removals turned off, they can't go face with any of their villainy triggers. But, like, if they can stall the game out long enough to find this, they can answer your Guiding Light and then kill you. So I think having this in the format is going to be a really big deal for those sorts of villainy decks, which is weird because this is not the sort of card you usually want in villainy, because villainy gives you enough removal to begin with. But I think this is something to remember exists for like GP sideboards and stuff like that.
yeah, agree. I think it's a very solid like 2-up sideboard card. All right, let's move on.
Yeah, to a card that probably isn't MSEM playable, but is still incredibly sick. It's Luna the Lost. So it's a 2-mana, 2/1 Fox, and it's basically Norn. It's Norn but with phasing, and it's black. Let's be real. But I think that, again, I think this is like the first Norn effect that we've had in the format. So for MSEDH, you can do a decent amount of the classic Norn things.
Not really. Like
It doesn't
one
trigger
thing that
ATB though, so I think
yeah, that's like the thing you could do with Norn, like in both MSE or like both in Modern and in EDH, is like Impact Tremor, Soul Sisters. This is my plan. Whereas this is just like you get one life lost to every single player once per like round, which is
yeah.
not very good.
And
Yeah,
also
like
it
not being each end
yeah.
step is definitely painful.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that practicality wise, I see very few scenarios where you actually want to use this beyond like, oh, it's number on cute.
Yeah, and I think that's like a reason that it's going to see MSEDH play. But that's kind of the end of the story there.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about Nightshade. The version you see is not the version you're going to get. The version you see can do some really stupid things with creatures that enter with a lot of -1/-1 counters. However, the new version is only 1 in a black, wow, buff, except it's for each permanent you control with a counter on it. instead of for each counter among permanents you control. So I think that kind of kills this card.
Yeah.
I think the main thing to keep in mind is, what is it called? Sovereign's Bite. So 2 mana, target player loses 3, you gain 3. That is not usually a constructed playable card. Sometimes in sideboards
we've
for
had exactly one
specifically
case.
aggro mirrors.
There's Soul Release, which is our version of it, and that has been played before. But
I think most of the time that's been played, it's not been strictly correct to play it. I don't disagree that people have played it.
There's the better version is whatchamacallit, the 3 mana version, Lost Memories. But I think in general we can just suffice it to say that new Nightshade is probably not going to get there, right?
You need 5 permanents with counters on them, so you probably want to have Cradle of Corruption, you want to have some other things with counters on them. You need to get a lot of things before it starts being appreciable. And at that point, it starts to become once you have an established board state that you've gone through really weird hoops to generate, now you have access to a 2 mana Lava X, which is pretty cool. But yeah.
So, I guess continuing the stretch of cards which are kind of cool, but not really for MSEM. We have Nuremai, Emma's Keeper, which is 2 and a black, and whenever an opponent discards a card, you get to essentially steal it and do the funny black steal it and cast it for as long as it remains exiled thing. Which, this is definitely very powerful in formats where you can just windmill slam some wheels, or windmill slam some mass discard effects, and then get some massive card advantage. But I think in MSCM, this likely just eats a removal spell and loses out in terms of deck slots to stuff like Heartwind.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think there's some maybe potential for this to somehow find home in MSEM, especially if you're cheating on mana. You can unearth this. You can, if you're doing some kind of weird pox thing, you could have each player discard a card, unearth this back, and then play your Curse of the Drow or whatever. But in general, I think that's kind of a hard sell even for me.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that it blocks well is something as well.
We've had lots of cards which if the blue moon came along where the stars aligned, it could be great. But I think this will probably just end up being another forgotten rare for MSEM.
Yeah, I did play an EDH game with this in it, and it was quite good. We'll say that.
So
yeah,
definitely keep an eye out on this for EDH. Because even though we already have some strong discard decks with Lady Ashima and Heartwind, I think Nuremai is different enough that I think it justifies itself, I guess. But speaking of discard, I think this is the next card is the official Dodger pick of the set. So do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, so I've been basically trying to keep my eye out for cards that fit in a particular archetype that I think is pretty close to being playable. But I think this goes in that deck, and that is Esper Peak Tribal. So basically, what I'm looking for with that deck is ways to look at your opponent's hand, and then stuff that you can name cards or name card types, and kind of screw your opponent over now that you know what's in their hand. So it's kind of like a weird tempo-y sort of thing. Stuff like Tau Locust Sentry goes in that deck. Stuff like Social Graces lets you get free peaks. And then, of course, running discard. Stolen Secrets is great if you know what's in your opponent's hand. Stuff like that. And I think this card, giving you access to a free peak is obviously nice. And so, you get a Cabal Therapy when you hit 4 mana, which is a lot for a Cabal Therapy. I will freely admit. And it's definitely not your plan A. But having your spell that already took out 1 card, and gave you a peak, now being able to give you a little flashback variant where you go and take their best card from their hand, possibly being able to hit multiple cards.
Yeah, a little flashback as a treat.
Yeah, I think that if you're getting value out of the peak and discarding a card from someone's hand, and then there's a reason to play this card in that kind of deck.
Dodger, I just want you to imagine a situation. You're playing against an opponent in an unknown league match.
Okay.
You're going first. You go turn 1 Swamp, Psychic Assault. They show you their hand. It's Unearthed, Champion of Destinies, and
Yeah,
some other
then you
cards you don't
concede.
care about. Yeah,
Then you
exactly.
concede. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think
I mean,
like
honestly, that's a win because then I get to quit Magic. So I get my life back, you know. But I think I think that like obviously this is really bad if your opponent has cards they want to get in the graveyard, in which case that's what the sideboard's for. But yeah, I don't know. I think like it's okay for my Dodger pick to be dubious, and I think it's a Dodger pick that's um very much indexed towards a certain deck that I want to try to make work, and I'm constantly looking for new tools for. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's
Yeah,
cool at the very least.
I think so. My feelings on this card kind of boiled down to I think people are going to overestimate how good the front side is in your average game of Magic, and are going to misidentify how good the backside is, but I'm not going to say over or underestimate, because I think the backside is really bad against a fairly sizable chunk of decks and really good against the remaining percentage. So, like,
Right.
I as a player can never beat this card. This card's just good versus anything I want to be doing ever.
It's great against control for sure.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
also, like, not bad versus, like, I wouldn't say hard ramp, but any of the decks where your plan on ramp is just hitting a bunch of land drops.
Yeah,
So, like,
and like any
if
of
you're
these
playing
decks
on
that are kind
fair
of like
casting Scion of Desolation, this is a good card against that sort of deck.
yeah, any of these decks that are like super dependent on card density. You know, like this actually isn't half bad versus burn, to be honest.
Um, I get what you're saying, but like I think
I mean,
having
it's not
the
good.
matchup,
It's not
it's
good, but
it's the
it's
same
worse
level
than
as
most of
that.
the burn.
Like that's the thing is you cut this faster than you cut duress in the burn matchup, and you already are trying to
Yeah.
cut duress as fast as possible in that matchup.
Okay, but like I don't know. I feel like you could maybe just not cast at turn 1, and you'd be more likely to. It's still not great. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
Never mind.
it's
Okay.
the main thing is 1 mana target player discards a card has never been good. Like they have to stamp some pretty absurd upsides onto it to make it good,
Yeah.
and the absurd upside on this card is the 4 mana mode. So any matchup where the 4 mana mode is live, this card becomes good. Any matchup where it's not live, this card is dead.
Yeah. So maybe you want to run this in. See, I don't even think this is a good sideboard option because like if you want to
I
run
would not.
discard versus control, you should just run Curse of the Draw.
Like I think this is just not a high impact enough card in terms of sideboard. I think one thing that's interesting about this card is when you mill over it, it effectively is drawn. Since
Also
as we
true.
established,
Yeah,
the
it's
front side is not very good.
great to loot away as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like in most, I don't know if this has been mentioned yet. Sorry, I zoned out for a second, but I feel like in most situations where you're running this, like cranial violation might just do the job better.
Cranial Violation is really bad versus anything that isn't a mid-range deck. If you're actually trying to cast it as a disruptive spell,
Yeah,
That's
this
fair.
card's good as a disruptive spell, and especially good as a disruptive spell versus control because they can't counter the backside of this.
That's
So
fair.
4 mana is a lot of mana, but you do get to just say, cool, you lose your top end threat. You lose this one counterspell or one board wipe I can't beat. The issue is they do get to play around this because they see it in your graveyard and they know they have a good guess as when you're going to sequence it. So they just try to put you in circumstances where you can't cast this profitably. But I don't know. I think this card has a lot of interesting game to it.
All right, let's move to an actual
Cast it,
card.
though,
Shall we?
This can't be countered, right?
It can't. Yeah,
You can disallow it.
yeah, that's true. But like,
I
okay.
think,
So the
I
next
think,
card.
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh,
I was just gonna say that
I
like,
mean, do we want to stay on it or?
no, it was just like
Nah.
it was a pip quote from a while back where like, if someone actually hits me with a disallow in MSEM, like, it, then like at that point I'll know that like it's my time to quit MSEM or something like that.
I've
But
seen Seagreen Null
Hey,
Mages.
Disallow was in Blues Eclipse's sideboard in the last GP.
But should it have been?
I mean, I don't
Should
know.
those have just been Seagreen Null Mages?
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean,
All right,
I actually,
yeah.
okay. We're getting a little off topic.
Yeah,
but-
we've been talking about like the viability of kind of like fringe cards, but let's talk about a card that is very much not that. which is one of the best cards in the set likely, and one that has been changed a few times. It's Rocket Admin. So once again, this is another card which the version you're seeing on screen isn't the same as the one that's going to be printed. Um, so right now it reads, when Rocket Admin enters the battlefield, you may pay 3 life. When you do, gain control of target creature or planeswalker with confirmed mana cost 3 or less until its owner pays 6 life. So very powerful. But the 6 life has been changed to pays 3 mana, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
Correct.
that's correct. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which, if you are familiar with the MSEM ban list, you will know that forcing your opponent to pay not just 1 mana, but multiple manas is a really good way of fucking up everything they're doing. But the question now becomes, okay, so this is 2 and a black for a 2/1 where ETB you can pay 3 life if you do 3 lands they control don't untap during their next untap step. That's not that good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the old version was like at the level of kind of a ubiquitous staple, I think. Or not like
Yeah.
ubiquitous, but like a highly played staple. This version feels like it wants to go either in sideboards or in decks that have very aggressive game plans.
Yeah.
And I think that that's fine. Like, I think this card will see play. I think it'll be good. And
It's also good with sack outlets.
also true, yeah.
Yeah, actually, I was wondering about
No,
that.
this was sadistic indulgence. No.
So
You can't respond to the paying of mana. That's
okay.
a special action. It doesn't use the stack.
Yeah,
But
so
you can just do it before they have the mana.
if they have 3 mana available when you play this, you can't sack permanent. Right? Yeah.
Correct. But you still do gain control of it for a moment. You just can't do anything with that moment. Well, no, wait.
Actually, wait,
Okay,
wouldn't it depend on priority?
Yeah, so how it works is if this enters the battlefield on your turn, you pay 3 life. When you do, you target a thing. When that trigger resolves, you control that thing, you have priority. If you have a sack outlet already in play, you can immediately sack it.
Oh, okay,
The
but
second your
sadistic
opponent-
indulgence won't work because that's a
Correct.
targeted
It's an
ability.
activated ability, it targets it. It has to target a permanent you control. But they can respond to the sack, but they can't respond to the cost being paid.
Can they
So they
respond
can-
to the trigger paying 3? I think no, right?
They
Or no,
they
not like
can, but you
respond.
don't control the creature yet.
Yeah. It's kind
So
of
they get
weird.
if they also have a sack outlet, they can sack their creature that you're trying to steal because
Right.
that's how the when you do works.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think this card is in a very weird place now. I don't really play decks that this card's good against typically.
Mhm.
I think where this card's best is in mid-range mirrors where you're playing at turn 2 off a dork and then you're like stealing their dork or something. And it's like,
I
oh
think-
shit, now I have to play out lands naturally.
I think if this card was legal, when I played Black White on Earth, I would have had it in my sideboard.
Yeah, I buy that.
Yeah, this is one of those cards where, like, I think because of the shift caused by Pit Wilt, I think that this naturally also gets a little bit worse. Not significantly enough, but enough. Okay.
One last thing to like consider in terms of like how this plays and how you play against it and stuff is the reason why Unmasker of Fate's Design is so obnoxious is because you end up forcing your opponent to pay 2 mana to not impact the board in a matchup where you play a 1 mana 2/1. And that kind of is a death sentence in and of itself. When your opponent is paying 3 mana, that can be a big deal, but the 3 mana they're paying does impact the board. It takes a creature away from you and gives it to them. And
Yeah,
again,
and then it's like you paid 3 mana for a 2/1.
exactly. So
And you lost 3 life.
And you lost 3 life. It's like I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind because I think this card is going to look better than it actually is. And
Yeah, I agree.
I think it kind of looks bad.
All right, next card is Twister of Shadows. It's a 4 mana 7/7. Nice. With flying and trample. So obviously that's a pretty good rate. I don't know. But has the drawback of you can cast it only if you have 10 or less life. So kind of keeping with the theme of Black set of like paying life. And obviously with the theme that we've kind of been talking about with a lot of the new cards being added. in the bonus sheet. I think that it's kind of the dichotomy of this card is like, if you're a deck that's trying to go ham on reducing your own life total super quickly, how likely are you to be wanting a 4-drop? That's kind of where I'm at with it. You know?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have any defensive keywords. Its defensive keyword is big,
Yeah.
which is a defensive keyword, kind of. Something that's nice about it is if you're not casting it, it's better. So that's a good reason why this is a 4-drop and not a 3-drop.
Right. Oh, if you unearth this, that would be absolutely insane. Yeah, but like,
yeah, like I'm trying to think, like,
puppeteering that counts.
are there ways? Which card did you suggest?
Puppeteering.
Oh,
If
puppeteering.
you have a
Yeah,
creature die, you can pay 2 mana to get this. with
yeah, that's kind of
puppeteering.
sick. I don't know. Like, I feel like there has to be a way to cheat it out, and I think if you cheat it out, 7/7 Flying Trample enters the area of this was probably worth the effort you put into cheating out. Like, this isn't like a
Yeah, and it's also not that hard to enable casting this, even in a deck that doesn't go ham on losing your own life total.
Right.
Like, all you have to do is
You hit the mid game.
pay life to your shock fetches, get your plague lands, like run mono fetches, stuff like that.
Literally just play against aggro. They get you to 10 life at some point.
Yeah.
You now have a 7/7 Flying Trample. That stabilizes the board usually.
I mean,
blocks Plasma Addict forehead.
It's true.
I will say one thing that I don't like is that Nightshade, which features Ghastly, gains you life, and that's an anti-synergy with this, which depicts Gengar. So
you just target yourself, forehead.
You know what? But no, wait. Then you gain the life. Don't you also gain the life?
Wait,
so it doesn't do anything.
Just target yourself and cast this in response.
Doesn't this have like crazy synergy though with the fucking From Beyond the Grave?
Yeah,
So
it
like,
does for sure.
Counterpoint still works.
Yeah, but From Beyond the Grave shows Sableye, so it's a flavor fail. So
No, I'm pretty sure you missed the part of Monsters of Chikyu where Cajun reveals that Ghastly no longer reveals into Gengar, and actually it's Sableye that evolves into Gengar now.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah.
Yeah, that clarifies it.
Yeah, didn't realize that Cajun, that Monster Chikyu was based on a ROM hack. Yeah.
ROM hacks of Chikyu, let's fucking go.
I think this card is good. I think it might show up in a couple decks of build. I don't think it's like, I think it's a little harder to take advantage of than you think, just because the decks that go super, like, turn this on super quickly might not actually be interested in a 4-drop.
I think it's just really cool. This is the sort of card that, like, take note if you're designing sets for MSEM. This is the sort of card I like entering our format, where it's not an instant staple, and it's not like, oh, well, if you enable it, this card just like actually breaks the format in half, so we just have to hope no one ever enables it. It's just like, no, it's not impossible to enable, but it's non-trivial, and it causes us to reevaluate a bunch of different cards, and has a good payoff, but not a broken one. It's like, that's the sweet spot.
Sweet. All right. Next card?
Yep.
All right. Time for a history lesson that I'm sure no one asked for. So, this card kind of makes no sense because, hey, why does it have the trap mechanic? Is that a thing in the set? No. But it was a thing in a Zendikar Return set that was made by the community back in MSEM 1. So the card, if you were able to rewind time, this is a exact reprint, minus the trap subtype, of a card called Viper Trap. MSEM 1 was a really stupid place. I know at various points in time there were different amounts of fast mana. The format officially ended in a tournament where JN's first deck in the format was a burn deck with multiple different turn 2 kills. And yet Hersey was undefeated with 12 matches playing blue-black control. Viper Trap was a signature card in that, and I'm pretty sure this card is at least partially in the set as a plea bargain to Hersey of, please Hersey, don't null this set. Ooh. I don't think it worked that well.
I mean, the card is really good still.
This card's great.
Yeah. It's
essentially you 1 mana, destroy target attacking creature, you create a 1/1.
Honestly, if you're talking about removal spells that absolutely just shit on aggro, this is pretty much second to none.
Yeah.
I think. I mean, so there are a couple drawbacks. One of which is obviously you can't cast it for 1 mana if they're only attacking with one creature. It doesn't kill creatures with flying, and your opponent can kill the snake before it can block. So all of those are drawbacks that are real. But it also has the upside of your removal spell you can just cast it as a one death touch if you're in a pinch and need something to beat down with, which is like kind of troll. But like I
God, I
think the
hope
fact
that never happens.
I think it will happen, and that's okay.
I
Like
think it will, and I really hope it doesn't happen to me.
I mean, I don't know. Like, I still think that like having that flexibility on your removal spell is really good.
I think one thing that's really powerful about it is a lot of the circumstances that you were describing just aren't circumstances that you need to be worried about. Like if you're a control deck and your opponent is like only swinging at you with one creature every turn, that means they're not applying enough pressure, and like also they're probably really open to Execution, so that's great. If your opponent is attacking with two creatures, there's a good chance they're not going to have mana to also cast removal on your Viper Ambush. And even then, you'll still probably be up on tempo, even if you're like taking damage that turn.
Right, and also I think the fact that it doesn't work against flyers is kind of a knock against it. Maybe even the biggest one. I don't know.
I mean, I think it's a worry versus Plasmatic, but I don't think it's a worry versus that much else. The other big thing is this is good against hexproof creatures and various other creatures that are like resilient to removal. Like, I died recently to a Howling Alpha because it turned out that I just built my deck in such a way where I could not beat a Howling Alpha if I didn't draw a board wipe in like 3 to 4 turns, and I did not draw a board wipe in 3 to 4 turns.
There you go.
This card shits all over hexproof creatures that can't be sacrificed. Like anything that you're hedging against removal, this is probably going to attack on an angle that you just are not prepared to handle.
Yeah, I mean, I think this card is pretty sweet. I'm sure it's going to annoy me actually because I think I'm more likely to play against this than with it. But it's the kind of card that you may need to get used to playing around as well as an aggro player.
Yeah.
Okay, and the last black card is Wicked Fossil. Do you want to talk about this one, Kevin?
Sure. So Wicked Fossil, I think we skipped the blue one, right?
Yeah, because
Yeah, I
the
think
blue one mega
they
sucks.
agreed that one was going to make the list.
So 2-mana artifact, you can crit it for 2 to drain an opponent for 2. Pretty meh. But if it's in your grave, you essentially have a 4-mana uncounterable menace haste, just absolute beast of a card. I think you only want to play this in a deck where you're consistently milling or discarding it. But in those decks, it's pretty good.
Yeah, this is pretty sweet with Wheat from Jeff. Like if you just treat this as like the backside, like that's a fine card. But like the value comes from it actually drew me a card because I cast Wheat from Chaff and then I discarded this card that instead of like a card that actually wants to be in my hand. And I think the fact that you can sack this is nice if you're in the long game, you need a little extra reach. Like if you top deck this, it can be like, okay, well, I just play it, my opponent is at like 6, so I drain them for 2, and the next turn I can finish them off, right? I think that it's kind of a little dicey. Like you need a lot of synergies to line up, but the power level is close enough to MSEM that I think like maybe there's a deck where you want this.
Yeah, it's functionally swinging as a 6-power menace creature, and it's doing that like the second you have 4 mana and this in your graveyard. But there's enough like kind of little things that are dings on it for me that I won't be shocked if it doesn't make it.
Yeah.
I also wouldn't be surprised if it shows up and it's not bad. I would be shocked if it shows up and it's like nuts.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be nuts. I think it'll be fine. In a very few.
Actually, costing mana is a real hoop.
Yeah. All right. Should we move on to red?
Yep, and
Sounds good.
the first red card is Ace Trainer. So it's a 2-mana 2/1, and it's basically just an anthem for non-human creatures. It gives them +1/+0. So I think it's pretty simple / obvious what kind of strategies you play this in. if you have some sort of deck where you are going wide either with tokens or just normally with non-human creatures, being an Anthem on an already reasonably aggressively statted body is just pretty gas. Of
Yeah,
course,
I get.
where that niche exists right now, not exactly certain, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean this into Tam, that's a nice curve.
Oh,
Yeah, but
always,
is it better
always
than
with the
just doing?
Tam.
It's better than doing what's it called? The Lovia Woken card that's one in a red and it's like +2/+0. Like
Oh, Rabbit Thrill.
that's yeah. Like that's my main concern with Ace Trainer is it's on a body which is not an upside if you're versus actual board wipes in your token deck, and this is not the best non-human payoff in the format, is what I will say.
Yeah, I think that
Yeah,
this
who
card
would
seems
print
a
a
bit
5/5 which
misleading.
taxes?
Yeah.
Kind of fucked up.
Yeah, I think like maybe if you have a lot of cards that want this and you're in need of a 2-drop, I will say that I think Advocate of the Hunt probably does a similar job but better.
Mm.
Which is another thing that like is a ding for me on this card. So I kind of am sus on this, but it was probably worth mentioning. All right, should we move on?
Yep.
Elemental of Surprise, which has an excellent name. Thank you, Cage, for continuing to deliver. It's 2 in a red. It's a 2/2 with flash. Creatures you control that have entered the battlefield this turn get ++1, have haste, and first strike. So this is a 3-mana 3/3 haste first strike for the first turn it comes down, and then it gives like a little anthem thingamajig. Or it's a 3-mana 3/3 flash first strike. I'm not like this is a card that's like good enough that I didn't want to remove it from the list, but I'm really not sold on this, guys.
I think the fact that it gives all your creatures haste is kind of nice. And the fact that this attacks well by itself, like as a 3-mana 3/3 with first strike, means that like um I think it provides enough utility. Also, the fact that it can ambush attackers too. Um, I'm not sure exactly what deck wants it, but I think it's worth consideration.
Yeah, I think if you're the problem is like I think Champ does the
Yeah.
if you're in red white, it does that. So you need to be using you can't just rely on it as itself. You need it to be doing something with some other card. Which
I'm not
obviously
really
the
sure. I think
synergy
this
is you play this and then you
better
play
than
Sigura
Nightshade.
Tam. I think that's the
Or
obvious.
newcomer's luck is still a thing, right?
It's 2 mana,
Yeah.
but yes.
Isn't this just better than Tai Champ? It gives all your other creatures haste.
Champ stays as a 3-power creature, though.
So I feel like the -1 power is way better. Like I would take -1 power and give all my creatures haste than +1 power.
Yeah. I mean, Champ was mostly played in decks that all the creatures already had haste, but like maybe this changes things. Champ also wasn't Anthem. I don't know. I think this card is just it falls off kind of quickly on its own. So you really need to be playing this and then continuing to pump more things onto the field afterwards. And I think doing that's a really unsafe strategy in MSEM right now.
See, I don't even necessarily agree with that because I feel like people aren't really playing. Like right now, people are playing a lot of like many color mid range and spot removal.
Those people are foolish then.
I mean, Sing's Grasp was pretty prominent last tournament, so
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I don't know. I just think that like I think that this has just a ton of utility. Is where I'm landing on
I
it.
think it's one of those things where like
Yeah,
at 2.5 mana it would be pretty amazing, but then it's at this awkward spot where 3 is just the awkward middle point down the curve.
I don't know. I actually started out being kind of sus on it too, but the more I thought about it, the more I feel like this card actually does get there in some decks. Particularly decks that make tokens, but also decks that have creatures with like attack triggers and stuff like that.
But like I think coming back to what Pip was saying in regards to Ace Trainer, I think that like being on a body is a drawback because the way I saw like the one tokens deck win a GP is that it would land a Rabid Thrill, it would get wiped, whatever. But then like it had a bunch of other hasty token makers, and those kept threatening lethal because the anthem stuck around even post wipe. So
Wait, hold up. I'm sorry. The only tokens deck to win a GP?
in recent
I don't.
memory,
So I don't
and
think
recent
in
memory.
my recent memory, I mean my memory.
I think the fact that you can also use this to kill attackers, and you can flash out your anthem on end step and then drop out a bunch of hasty creatures means that like if your opponent taps out, they could randomly see like a ton of creatures attacking them on the next turn that they had no idea that they could like.
But it also
were-
isn't like a
were-
permanent anthem. Like if like it's a permanent anthem as long as your creature like dying EOT. But like the fact that the 1/1s you make like swing for 2 power the first turn, and then just like are back to being 1 power the next turn, like that's worse in long drawn out games. I agree it's better in
Right.
games where you're just trying to rush people down though. So the question is like, does this help as much as other 3 drops do?
Also, the defensive utility, it feels like you're already losing if you're trying to use it for defensive utility, or like if you're just flashing it in on end step as a surprise. Why are you holding up mana if you're an aggressive, proactive deck?
I mean, the question to me, like now that we've kind of come in full circle, is I wonder if there are decks that can abuse this that aren't like balls to the walls token aggro. Like, what if
So
we're
what
looking
I
at this wrong? And the best
so
way
what
to
I
do it
what
is
I like
this.
about I'm sorry,
Mhm.
sorry. What I like about this card is with Untitled Archdruid is actually one of the cards I've been looking at.
Yeah,
Because I just played a league deck with Untitled Archdruid and Salem and Serto, and that's actually a really sick combination because you get to just skip the drawback of having to wait a turn, and you can just be like play my Archdruid, play my extra land, go nuts, you know. And I
yeah.
think having another efficient way to do that means that I'm kind of actually looking to do this in some kind of mid-range deck, not necessarily like an aggro deck, but
Yeah, and I think mid-range decks are the ones best suited to take advantage of the fact this is a split card of 3/3 first strike flash versus 3/3 first strike haste.
right.
Or like the fact that mid-range decks can now like you do this until this into Lyran Alpha or this into Roll is 1,000 times scarier this into Siguraton.
Yeah, that sounds a lot better. I agree. Okay, I think we talked about this card a lot. We should probably move on.
Cool. Let's talk about this one. I think this one will be really quick.
Yeah.
So Emanoru Emma's Wings is a 3/3 haste. But if it's technically low, it's actually a 3/3 haste flying double strike. I kind of agree with your description of this in the Google Doc Dodger that it kind of shapes up it like shapes up interestingly compared to Thundermaw Hellkite. Like
Right.
5 mana haste swings for 6 flying the turn it comes down. It doesn't have the Thundermaw clear blockers thing, but like that's one of the most flavor text parts of Thundermaw. It's not a dragon, which would have been a big deal. I think it's
Yeah,
fine.
the big drawback is
so-
that it dies to
Rogars.
damage-based removal.
Yeah,
Dying to Rogar's Frenzy is really bad. Like if you spend 5 mana on your finisher and then they just pay 2 mana and kill it, like that is really not where you want to be.
it's also just shit off the defense. Like it needs to
Yeah.
be swinging in for it to be like approaching good. If you like, we've talked about like 3 mana 3/3s that just sit there are bad. This is a 5 mana 3/3 if it's just sitting there. So
Yeah, and I think like also the fact that it doesn't let you attack with other creatures is also like something that you kind of like if this gave the bonus to any creature that's attacking alone, I would be a lot more on it because then there's a lot more ability there.
I think what we should do is, in the tradition of other cards that can only attack alone, I think that we should make it 1 mana and make it a 1/1, and then rename it like Emanoru Champion. I think that would be fun and cool.
and
yes.
we could just call it M Champ for short.
See, we're submit it to
I think
Cajun. Get it on the presses.
it's definitely a niche card, and I think it very likely doesn't get there at all. But it's actually 5 mana for 6 damage that can attack every single turn like that is not negligible. So I just thought that might be worth pointing out. But shall I do the next one?
Yeah, let's talk about this flying creature.
So it's Flame-tailed Lizard. It's a 2 mana 2/2 with experience. So it's the red version of the starter cycle. And then when you get 3 counters on it, it turns into Flame-tested Dragon, which is a 6/5 flying first strike. And the trigger, whenever it transforms or attacks, it deals 1 damage to each creature you don't control.
I think of the three, this definitely has the weakest / most situational flip trigger.
Yeah, but it also has the best body, I think. Like a 6-mana, a 6/5 flying first strike is going to kill people real quickly.
100%.
Yeah, and it's very tough to beat this in combat. I think overall, I'm not sure what deck I want to put this in necessarily, but I think like at the very least it can be a decent like Performer of Desire like. And there's also a green-red counter deck that this pretty naturally slots into.
The
Assuming you
green
can
red
make
counters,
mana
if I
work.
remember right, is kind of already chomping at the bit at the true drop slot. So
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of
Yeah, it's a
competition for that.
little.
So maybe you don't necessarily want this, but the fact that that deck doesn't usually have a lot of evasion, so the fact that this is a form of evasion, and it randomly screws over tokens decks too, is like not negligible. Like this, getting to nuke all of someone's mana dorks randomly is actually kind of sick sometimes.
yeah, and like the more I think about it, I think the more it's just that like you find some of the previous creatures to replace just because like of how high impact this is once it flips. Like I think yeah, you could remove like I'm trying to think like maybe some avatar of the naturals for this.
Also, keep in mind
Wow.
if you transform this before attacking, it will kill all creatures with 2 toughness or less.
I feel like this is just so much worse than the turtle. Like
Yeah,
hexproof and being good versus big creatures is just such a big deal because these sorts of decks that the flip side of this is good against are already the sorts of decks that you just don't need to be worried about that much because they're the sorts of decks that are usually soft to you, like dumping effort into these things. Also, something to consider about all the starters is even once they're flipped, they all die to Pithwilt. Like they still have CMC too.
that's true.
You
Well,
can
not
rot them. All of the starters are 2 mana or less.
I'm sorry. How is
Like
Pitbull killing Tsunami
that's
Tyrant?
I mean, that's my point about why Tsunami Tyrant's good and this one isn't. Like, I'm just looking
Yeah.
at this and like, I'm just so much lower on this because you can go through all of this effort to set it up and then it dies. And like, yeah, it dealt 1 damage to each of their creatures, but if they were a control deck, it did nothing. Versus a
I mean,
control deck, this is just a 6/5 flying first strike.
it's still a good
That's
Rush Wolf, like at base.
yeah. I mean, like that's the
I
thing.
mean,
Is
it,
like,
it has the same play pattern as the Cubs we were talking about earlier.
Right.
In that if it's cool because it forces them to either like run out a removal spell on it, and then you can run a removal spell or a wipe on it, and then you can like save resources. But other than that, yeah, it's definitely weaker than the turtle, and I think in my opinion, it's weaker than the dinosaur that's coming up.
Yeah, if you
I'm
say
kind of inclined to
like
agree.
it's the worst of the 3, I think that's fair.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. I'm definitely at it's the worst of the 3. I can't decide if I think it's like actually bad or not. I'm inclined to think it's better than I think it is just because I'm usually good against these sorts of cards, and that's a bad sense of like
I think
actually
it's
analyzing the
more
format.
likely to have a deck that it goes in.
I agree with that. Like
Um,
red and counters go together much better,
Yeah.
and those decks can better take advantage of this. So,
Yeah.
all right, let's move on. And I'm
Yep.
talking about Charmander.
Yeah, now we
Cool,
can
so
talk
next
about
time
another
we'll
cool.
run
Yeah, you know what? Gen 1, so boring and old. Now Gen 2,
Gen 2.
that's where it's at.
Real
So
shit.
Yep, so we got Typhlosion on this Lava Plume, which is 1 red for sorcery, deals 3 damage to any target, which is really below rate in this format considering you get the same effect for 2 mana cheaper. But it does have an upside in that at the beginning of your end step, if you have 5 or less life, you can essentially turn it into a Scorch by exiling it from your graveyard. Now the question is, what deck is both going to be able to like get this into the graveyard, and also get themselves down to 5 or less life?
So
It feels
I
like
think
a weird confluence.
the answer is pretty easily the Inked Summoner deck. All you have to do is give the Phoenix this away, and you're in the money, I think. Give to the Phoenix even plays into your other synergies and puts you closer to 5 life.
That's fair. But then, like, if you're gifted the Phoenix this away, why not just? I guess like, it's a Scorch from the grave, so it's card advantage.
Like, that's the thing, though. It's like it's at the end of the day, you have 5 life and it's a Scorch. Like, it's not going to change any games. Like, I think you have to be deck where you don't mind casting this for this to be actually good.
Yeah, that's true. And if you're low curve enough, then you probably don't mind.
Yeah,
I mean, I think if you are playing this deck, you probably also want to have Gifts of the Phoenix. This is
that's
the kind
maybe
of
fair.
I think this card would be a lot better if we could still play Torment Lands,
Yeah,
because Torment Lands could put you down to 5 life, and they could also discard this for you.
but like it's not like you're gaining a card like this. This isn't like we banned Scorch and now this is how you get to play Scorch. Like the thing that you need to
Yeah.
sell me on is that the hoops that we're describing are that they're actually hoops that you're going through. As the question is, or instead of jumping through those hoops, I could play Scorch. So like the thing that makes this good is like if it is actual card advantage and not just soft card advantage in the form of I ditched a card I didn't want to draw because like or you could have just played a good card.
Well, I think if you're already playing the kind of hurt yourself style, Gift of the Phoenix is a card you might want to play, and in that
Sure.
case, this goes really well into that deck too.
Yeah, but then like
Okay,
I think
okay.
the argument is like, are the cases where you loot this away with Gift of the Phoenix and then get down to 5 life more common slash useful than uh, the tempo gain that you would get by just playing this as a Scorch? You know?
Yeah, I mean that you could also just run Scorch. Like,
So like yeah, if the answer here is it's Scorch copies 5 through 8 in a deck where you were built around utilizing it, then like maybe that's more believable.
right.
But the question is though, like, okay, but is it now better than Storm Surge? Like, how many
Yeah,
Scorches do you
Or a
want to run?
Bossa Charm or something like that.
Oh, well, it's
right.
definitely better than Boss Charm. I do think
Because
that
any
this is better.
target, but yeah.
Yeah, like you can cast this as a removal spell, and then in the late game you can cast this as another removal spell to reach. Like, I think that's pretty real. I think that Brazen Sacrilege is a really fucked up card, and that makes this look really bad. Um, but I don't know. It's like it's a cool card. I want to believe. But
I think I'm gonna build a deck with this, and I'll see
yeah,
how it does. I think
I'm not a believer yet.
it will be good, but not great. If that
Okay.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
All right.
next
Next
up
up
we
is
have Mountain Runt, which is 3 mana 2/2, so a little bit under rate. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you get to buff it up, and then it deals 1 damage to a target creature you don't control. And then it's basically an experience riff where you don't get the counters by attacking, you get them by playing lands each turn, and then transforms into Mountain Tyrant, which is a 7/7 menace. This feels just abjectly bad. I don't know if it's just me.
Okay, so there's
I
a really
disagree.
fucked up deck that involves playing a bunch of lands. So like if you play this, then you play a couple of lands, you kind of just win the game on the spot.
Also, like, the fact that you can pretty easily flip this the next turn with, fetches, specifically the Hembo fetches or shifting lands.
Yep.
Yeah, like mono fetches make this card really fucked up.
I guarantee you I'll be playing this in Wonderful. I think
Like
it's very good in that deck.
I think it should be able to go turn 1 Dwarf, turn 2 Mountain Runt, turn 3. You have a Mountain Tyrant.
Yeah.
They
Like,
now
that's
need to
very
deal with your Mountain Tyrant. Also, it bolted a creature you didn't control. You
Right.
killed their 2-drop.
And you can split up the pings so that at the end step, Mountain Tyrant will finish them all off as well.
Okay,
Like,
you
there's
guys
a
are
lot of
selling me a
flexibility.
little bit more on this, but I'm still, eh.
So you
Like-
don't run this in any old deck, but there's already an archetype where this is really good, and there are plenty of other archetypes too. I think.
Yeah, that's the thing is like I am if Waterfall didn't exist and Dodger was like describing like this hypothetical shell where like you played Seeker of New Horizons and Mountain Red, I'd be like, yeah, I mean maybe, but like no, I've seen the deck. I know how nuts it is. This card goes right in and it gives it just a whole new angle of attack. And that's the thing that makes that sort of deck so scary is the more angles of attack that deck has, the harder it is to actually beat. Because like
Right.
once you're dealing with Mountain Run, you now can't play to the board. Now you need to figure out ways to beat it that don't involve playing to the board. Except at the same time, you can't beat it via card advantage because Seeker of New Horizons just shuts that angle off. And every single time this deck gets another angle like that, it just becomes that much scarier.
Also, it's a great Blood River target, or not like target, but like you can Blood River it and deck for 7. Like,
Okay, I think
it's like not that hard.
you guys have turned me around on this card.
You can also
rare
Seed Shrine it
occurrence.
if you want to make it flip more quickly, but I don't think that's necessary. Like there's a lot of tools to play around with it.
That just kind of rock because it means like even if you didn't have any mono fetches in play prior to playing this, if you play a green mono fetch, get Sea Shrine, put a counter on it, boom, flipped.
Yeah,
Done.
exactly. Like
Yeah,
I think that this Wonderfall kind of lost a couple slots, and I've been kind of trying to retool how I want to build it. In that Intrepid is probably no longer great, and then also Into the Unknown isn't like the free I win button that it was. It still might be worth playing. I'm not sure. Like Jobaya is probably pretty good too, but like basically, I think that this card absolutely goes in Wonderfall. I think that it's the real deal. Yeah. Cool. All right. Should we go to next card?
Yeah. Let's talk about Wild Encounter. This is yet another Through the Breach card that is being printed, except this card does something kind of whack, which is it's a Through the Breach that doubles ability activations. This kind of makes me think that, like, putting in a creature, not as good, especially because we don't have actual factual Gristlebrand. This would be really fun to play actual factual Gristlebrand with. Like, oh, cool, pay 7 life, draw 14 cards. Now I'm really breaking this Gristlebrand thing. But yeah, like, you cast this, you put in a Velier, you -3, you draw 6 cards, you can cast, I think, only one spell.
Wait, can you
No,
cast two?
Because it just changes the next spell you cast, right?
Oh yeah, so that's true.
Those don't stack up.
Oh, I thought it was cast a spell for free. Yeah, never mind.
I think.
I think you're right.
Or like, plus, and now you have 16 power of tokens. Like,
right.
Or
yeah.
The other minus, not the plus.
Yeah.
Like, Wild Encounter is a card that, like, I don't think it's better than any cards people currently play, but it's different.
Yeah, so. It's like it goes in. It makes its own archetype essentially. And I think that's honestly not a bad archetype. Like you can ramp to 5 pretty quickly, even without using mana dorks. There's enough like random extra mana generation still in the format with stuff like Prismite Vault plus Imperial Palace. Like that's something that I think people should probably be looking into abusing more. And I think that like you get a reasonable payoff for playing an engine that you might already want to be playing with the whole like cheat 'em out stuff, but I don't know. I think this card's pretty sweet.
Okay, and next up we have our last red card, which is Worried Vulpine, another 1-mana experiencer. And it basically, you know how we were talking about it being pretty poggers that Elemental of Surprise gives all your creatures haste? Well, that does this on the flip side too. And not only does it give them haste, it gives them trample, which is very nice for getting in those last few points of damage in an aggro deck.
Yeah, it's weird. I actually think this is better than Flame-tailed Lizard for green red.
What?
I don't know. It's just like the 1-drop slot is less competitive. It flips faster. It's essentially the same body, and like the ability to get creatures haste is relevant, and I think possibly better than the deal 1 damage to everything.
I think it's better than deal 1 damage to everything. I think it's worse than the flying and first strike, though.
Yeah, I know having flying is pretty big, but at least it has trample.
Yeah, having
so
trample's
you get
not bad.
some form of evasion.
I think this card is like kind of the on the opposite side of the spectrum. I think this card is kind of the weakest of the experience cards we're talking about. But the thing that makes it good is the same thing that makes the white 1-drop good, which is just it's not in a competitive slot. Like you can get away with playing 1-drop experience creatures really easily.
Yeah, and I think that deck kind of was in the need for another card like this because Primal Ruffian is probably the best card in the deck. But it didn't have a lot of other great 1-mana plays red. So I actually think that this card probably goes in there. Like if you play this on turn 1, then cast Emirami's on turn 2, suddenly you've got, your 2/3 swinging in already, and then next turn it'll be a 5/5. So yeah, I don't know. I think this card is going to be propped up a little bit by the lack of competition, but I think it's definitely powerful enough to see play.
All right, So let's briefly talk about A Journey Begins. This is a solid cantrip, but that's kind of all it is. I think that's very notable because I think the card's design invites Ancient Strings comparisons.
Right.
This is only good at assembling pieces that cost 3 or less, which one of the powers of Ancient Strings is it can find both your payoffs and also your threats. Your payoffs and your like enablers. And this realistically can only find enablers because the decks that can abuse like you don't put this in an aggro deck. Don't put cantrips in your aggro deck unless you have payoff like Delver. Like
Yeah,
so
I don't. So I don't really see this in an aggro deck, but I do think this is very strong in like say a Jund deck that mostly tops out at 3. So like maybe this can find your
The problem is,
well
if you're
your
in
deck wouldn't
Jund,
want
then
to.
you might as well go to 4 for Hellion Devastator at that point.
Okay, that's true. Jund is a bad example, but I think there are decks that are mostly permanent mid-range decks that would benefit a lot from this turn 1 selection. And you can find a good 3-drop planeswalker like Eli or maybe even Rhinza or Mumpumo or whatever.
I don't like card selection in my mid range decks when I could instead just play Mantorks because I feel like the number of games you win because you consistently found the threat are less than the number of games you win because you get to play a turn 2 threat and you can just mulligan better.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't know. I think that this is like one of the better, if not the best, Ancient Stirrings variant in the format. Personally, and the fact that
we
it's
can we
also
just
finding
leave it at
lands.
like we don't quite know where it goes yet, and if there is a
Yeah,
deck that it ends up going in, so much the better.
I think it's really not that hard to envision a deck where this is something you want. I guess is my point.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Okay, next up, we've been talking about her we talked about her early on when we were talking about the lore of the set, but she's finally here. It's Bessie, the Worm Planeswalker. So she's kind of unique in that you can flip her between creature and planeswalker. And as a creature, she's a 6/6 trample haste. But as a planeswalker, she's just got a +1 with creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain haste. Once again, granting haste, poggers. And her -6 is create 5 3/3 green worm creature tokens with trample and haste. It feels like a really cool design, but one that I struggle to see a use for in MSEM unless I'm missing something. It feels a lot more like a powerful standard design.
So I think there's a couple points to be made. One, if you're willing to invest 2 mana into it every turn, she actually can't be attacked because you can activate her ability before combat. And then it won't be a planeswalker; it'll just be a 6/6 creature.
At which
Right,
point,
so you
at
can-
which point they drop their creature removal on it and it dies, which is the trade-off.
Yeah, fair. But like, I think the fact that you can use her to block is kind of something unique that you don't really see on a lot of planeswalkers. I think the ability to give all of your creatures haste is something that can be nice for an aggro deck, but not like amazing on a 4-drop walker. And the fact that you have to essentially spend 6 mana before you can actually attack with her is sort of awkward when you're using it as your top end in an aggro deck. I don't know. Any other thoughts?
No, I think that mostly summarizes it.
Yeah.
The next card we're seeing is kind of a cool extension because it is Bessie's own entry into the villainy mega cycle. So next we have Brutality, which is 3 green mana for enchantment. Whenever one or more creatures you control deals combat damage to a player, you may destroy target artifact or enchantment that player controls. When you cast a green spell, create a 3/3 worm creature token with trample. A lot of this card's power is in the second ability. Like I would say, the vast majority of it. The Tricon Predator thing is neat, especially
It
if
makes
you're
it better in
like,
the head-to-head, but it's less versatile than the other first modes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably better than Whimsy because it actually impacts the board. And the second mode's better than Heroism. But
I think these sorts of incidental artifact enchantment destruction are really valuable because like you're already happy playing with this card for the second ability, right?
Yeah.
But then like assuming you're attacking people with green creatures, which you are, like the ability to continually blow up artifacts and really nice because you can use that to attack someone's mana if they're playing a Rail Lines deck. You can just shut off someone's deck entirely if they're playing Enchantress. Or like, it can be hard for someone to tap out and cast ability if you just threaten to instantly destroy it.
I think this card that first ability is scariest if you've played to the board prior to Brutality. Like if you cast a 2-drop and now your 3-drop eats their like earlier play while developing a board, like that's what makes Jade Ball Reclaimer a good card. I think Brutality is also just sick as hell in EDH because Trigon Predator is pretty good in EDH, but Trigon Predator for each of your opponents is even better in EDH.
Yeah, that's pretty nutty. And also like the continued source of creatures.
Yeah.
Does a lot. Cool. All right, next card.
Yep, so the next one is the final member of the starter experience trio. It's Budding Companion. So this one is an 8/6 with reach and trample, and it acts as a basically it doubles your mana. You untap all lands you control. So
this card is so weird.
I think it is the best of the cycle, or at least the one most likely to see play, just because green has so many ways to flip this early, and it curves really nicely into Katie.
Yeah, I think as we established earlier, Turtle is probably the better one. This one is just deck building wise most, compliant, I suppose is the word.
Yeah,
its ability is so much worse in those decks. Is my main issue
That's
with
true.
like that analysis. Is I think the fact it has good play with Katie is true, but Katie plays well with all of them, and like mana's not really an issue. So the question is which of these is the most busted when you flip them? And I don't think the answer is Flourishing Companion.
Oh yeah, the
I
answer
think
is
my
definitely
reasoning is not like obviously like I think going Tidal Turtle into Kati is a trivial curve, but what is the rest of the deck would be my question. And I think that I can envision like this in like something like Augur's a previous Obzon counters, like Obzon counters mid range deck. At which point it's like
let me make you a pitch. It's you take the like green white or green red counters decks exactly as they currently are, except you just add enough pain lands and you just add the turtle. It is the only blue card in your deck. It is double pipped, but you don't care because if it flips, you win the game.
I guess.
Yeah. I mean, so I also think that like it's worth pointing out this has a monstrous 8 attack.
Yeah,
like
it attack trample is kind of fucked up.
Yeah, so like it is often just going to end the game when it flips very quickly, and you don't really care about the ability. But like also the ability like giving you the option to, for instance, say you're playing Anomalion, being able to attack and then untap all your land, be able to activate Anomalion before combat or before damage, or like on your opponent's turn, like that's a lot of value. I think that like in general, this is the one that like you'll see the most out of the three because it just slots well into like all of these counter stacks are going to be green, and the fact that like they cost 2 pips is not negligible. Like it's kind of harder to go turn 1 Primal Ruffian into turn 2 Tidal Turtle without like taking a bunch of life. So yeah, in general, I don't know. That's my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think that about sums it up. So we can move on to our next card, Epic Encounter. So the MSEM Council has been notoriously cagey about wish effects in the format for good reason. But Epic Encounter somehow slipped through the cracks, maybe because it's just incredibly sick. It's 1 and a green for tutor up a legendary card you own from outside the game, and then, yeah, I think I'm not quite sure what the best thing to be doing with it is, but
probably a
Heart of Zadina.
kind.
Heart of Zadina.
Heart of Zadina, yeah, Heart of Zadina is really fucked up. It's also really good against if you're scared of them like seal the tombing an important combo piece, you can just like side one out, side in an Epic Encounter so that you do have a way to like get it, and like you're not just dead to seal stuff like that.
Yeah, I'll ray into this too.
I think one of the best things you can do with Epic Encounter is I think when Epic Encounter drops, we're going to see a lot of people who have never played with wishes before learning the hard way about how you need to build wish boards. I don't want to get into it on the podcast because I have a lot of feelings on the subject, but ask me at some point in time in deck building and I will answer. But
My guess
it's
is
just
you're talking about people putting 15 targets in their sideboard.
exactly.
Yeah.
You should probably not have more than like 4 targets in your
Yeah,
sideboard,
yeah.
maybe 6 if you're
and
ambitious.
I think that
The thing
each of
that's
those can basically correspond to
the thing
each
I
of the
like
phases
about
of the game. Are you on the
yeah,
back foot? Are you proactive? Is it still in neutral? That kind of thing.
the
Right,
best thing
and I
about
think
Epic Encounter though is there are enough legendary cards you would already want to sideboard. Like if you're a mid-range deck, there's a non-zero chance you already want to have planeswalkers in your sideboard because they help you like grind people out if you
yeah,
want to board them in versus control. If there's
I think
probably like hate bears that you want to board in versus
Gawu
some
is a
decks.
great target for this.
Oh my god, Gawu is insane with this because you
Yeah.
wouldn't hate boarding in Gawu if you had to cut Epic Encounter for some reason. And there are some matchups where just Gawu on 3 wins the game. So I
Yeah.
think this is my pick for like the card that just makes me go the most nuts in this set because it just completely recontextualizes the format and it's fucking awesome.
It does do a lot. Yeah, I agree. Okay,
I
next
think
one.
sorry, just want to quickly.
Sure,
The
sorry.
one drawback is just that it doesn't commit to the board, which like obviously is true of all tutors. It's still very cheap, but I think that like it's not like you're not going to be universally playing this. You're
Yeah, spending 2 mana at
which is
sorcery
a
speed
good
means
thing. I think that balances it out to a degree, which is which is ideal.
for sure.
I don't know.
Cool.
I'm just thinking of like in Heart Attack you can run this, and now you get to treat this is like kind of the new Intrepid, except it doesn't play the board, but it's 1 mana cheaper, and just like you can find Heart of Zadina. If you already have Heart of
you can
Zadina,
find Siessa, you can find I don't know.
And
it can
Jovia.
find it can find Mabel if you need to like jump up to like 8 mana from the like 5 or 6 you're at,
Ooh,
and
I
then
like this for Mabel. Yeah.
and then you can also have Azamir as a one of in your sideboard that just says, if I have the mana and I need to pay off, I can Epic Encounter for like the biggest fuck you payoff.
Yeah, for sure. All right.
Ever Knowing Rat. This is a Lone Survivor card, isn't it?
It's absolutely a Lone Survivor card and a very good one. This is like the comparison is something like Pelt Collector, or Experiment 1 from Canon Magic, and I think this is largely better than the cards because you don't have to play it on turn 1 for it to be good, and it can scale. Like you can drop this on turn 4 or something along with a 3-drop, and it'll be attacking as a 3/3 the next turn.
Yeah,
which
I
is
mean,
something that like
you also have like some really fucked up curves where it's like turn 1 this, turn 2 play like a Anomaly and attack for 2, turn 3 play Lone Survivor attack for 6, turn 4 bop them.
yeah, or like
Yeah,
this
so
into Avatar of the Natural, they'll keep growing.
that's very true, and it's something I did not think about. But yeah, that's true. they just keep buffing each other. That's very funny. Yeah, I mean, I think that this card is the real deal. I think that it absolutely goes into Lone Survivor. It goes into most Green X aggro decks, and maybe even enables mono green enough to the point where it's playable, but probably not, because I feel like mono green is just never going to get there.
Speaking of
Mono Green has felt fine historically, but anyway.
Yeah, speaking of fucked up Lone Survivor cards, Fog Spewer.
So this card's
yeah.
probably getting changed in some way, but we just don't know how yet. I regret all of the words that came out of my mouth that led to this card being created, which just involved me going to Custom Card Talk one morning and saying, hey, wait, can Mono Green get Thalia? And Cajun saying, thanks, I hate it. And the next thing I knew, this was in the set file, and I need to start thinking of like this being curved into Lone Survivor into Summit Guardian. Thank God that can never happen. But yeah, a Hate Bear is a good spell. Thalia is a kind of fucked up magic card, and one of the things that makes it marginally less fucked up is the fact that it's legendary. This is actually one-sided, i.e., you never control fewer creatures than yourself, and you can play multiples. So I have no idea what's going to happen to this card, but the answer is probably not. It's going to exist exactly as is.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably
what
the
we're
biggest
doing is
part.
we're removing the non-creature part of it.
So I think that like there's been a lot of good cards for Lone Survivor in this set, obviously, just because like of its nature of being a Pokemon set, but this is probably the best one. It does so much of just like naturally playing into that deck's game plan, to the point where like it's also playable if you're not playing Lone Survivor. Like it's perfectly reasonable to run like 4 of these in your side against control, or against combo, and just like bring them in, swing with some bears, and set your opponents back a turn. You know, you're also never going to be going tempo negative on this because your opponent's going to have to spend at least 2 mana to kill this, and that's if they're Exeanting it or Twilight Ambushing it or something.
Mm-hmm.
So overall, card good.
Mm-hmm. So the next card on our list is Hyper Beam, which is essentially 2 mana sorcery speed, target creature gains double strike. What's notable about this, though, is that it doesn't explicitly give double strike, it just doubles power and toughness, so you can stack it with actual double strike granters for some really powerful curves with stuff like Autumn Fae or our other double strike effect creatures. That's main.
You can also play multiple Hyper Beams.
What?
You can play multiple Hyper Beams.
Oh yeah. So
Yep.
yeah, so it's
It's closer to Berserk really than Team
I
of
don't. The main thing is having played the closest thing MSEM has ever had to Berserk in fact, 2 mana versus 1 mana is just so huge. Like it's a night and day difference because chaining Hyper Beams is close to impossible in the decks that want to do it. Right. Especially chaining Hyper Beams while doing literally anything else.
Chaining like an empowered into Hyper Beam is pretty easy for those lists.
True. I don't disagree with that, but it's also the question of like 2 mana at sorcery speed just sets you up to die to everything. Whereas like one of the advantages of like a lot of the pop spells that those decks play is their instant speed. You can like kind of force your opponent to make a wrong move because if they fuck up, if they go in on the creature when they shouldn't, boom, it gets +2/+2 in hexproof.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, like I think that this is another tool for those kind of like infect style combo decks. Yeah. Okay. Sure. Let's go.
Okay. So next up we have Slashing Pangolin, which at its base is a 3/3 trample haste for 3 and only scales if you curve into it, which again is pretty fucked up. It's comparable to, I think in some senses, War Pride Champion from Alara, and I think it'll fulfill similar roles in aggro decks, similar roles that card did in like aggressively oriented green decks, mostly Lone Survivor.
Notably, it's not actually when a creature you control attacks, so it also is like kind of decent on the defense.
That is notable. I didn't see that.
I think
this card's probably just going to get outclassed by other 3-drops, but I think like in a vacuum, it's a pretty fucked up 3-drop.
Yeah, that's pretty much my opinion on it too. Okay.
Our
next card.
Last green card, Wistful Fox. You want to take this, Dodger?
Sure. Yeah. So Wistful Fox is a 3/3 mana 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, you get to look at the top 8 cards of your library and get any creature in your hand. The rest go on the bottom. I think that the fact that this looks at 8 cards is what makes this kind of insane, actually, just in terms of like raw card selection. If you're a deck that doesn't mind running a 3-drop creature with a mediocre body, this is great. And this combining with other creatures that can maybe blink it, or return it, or whatever, makes me actually kind of high on it.
Traditional Podlight doesn't want to play this, but I think there are versions of a similar shell that you can take that really do. Like, I think this allows you to serve a similar purpose that the deck currently gets from just playing blue, basically. So, I don't know. I think it has a very powerful effect.
Yeah, and the flavor note it's hitting with the 8 cards is the 8 evolutions. So that's a fun fact about it.
I missed that. Okay.
So, Cage is going to have to buff it in like a year, right?
Oh yeah. So I guess the only thing is like which type is it going to be? So just place your bets on that. So I think the next card is probably one of the most hype and iconic cards in the set. It's Chikyu Champion,
It's Ash motherfucking Ketchum.
It's red. Thank you very much.
It's
Hey, Ash is a
Satoshi
champion.
motherfucking Ketchum.
But yeah, it's a whopping 9 mana, and you might be wondering, it's a 9 mana 1/1? What's going on here? Well, when it enters the battlefield, you get 6 creatures, each one representing one of Red's team from essentially Hard Gold, Soul Silver, or the original Gold and Silver. So it's just a board on a body, and it's insanely powerful. You probably play this in MSEM with like a cheat out effect alongside some of our other existing powerful cheat out targets. It's also really, I think it's becoming legendary, so you will be able to play it in EDH's Commander if that's your sort of thing. So yeah, just a very, I think, splashy, cool Timmy card.
My epic encounter was red. I just like walked into like a tall grass and just red was there, and he had 6 Pokemon, and I died.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is one of the better reanimation targets, I think, right off the bat, just of how
Yeah.
much raw stats you get here. You can also Blood River after reanimating this
Jesus
potentially,
Christ.
and just straight up kill someone.
Yep. It's also
Which
it's
I
also
think
really
is
nice that that 4 out of the 6 creatures don't die to violent collapse, so they actually have to have a actual factual wipe. And it's also
That's
nice
true,
that
yeah.
like 2 of
One
them
of
have
them,
evasion.
one of them has haste.
Yeah, one of them.
One
Like
of them has haste, and one of them has hexproof.
yeah,
One of them has flying.
yeah, they do be having
Yeah.
keywords though, except for the Snorlax, poor Snorlax.
It
But
puts 24 power onto the battlefield. I mean, Snorlax has a keyword. It has keyword big.
But yeah,
Well, actually,
24,
too
24,
goddamn tummy thick keyword.
24, 24 is pretty good stats. I say pretty good because that also is just like, that's like an 8-land roll. That's not unbeatable. But the fact that this is on a creature just makes cheating out just like so much easier. The thing that people have said you'll probably see in MSEDH, but also I think you can kind of justify in MCM, is just ASIN into this.
Yeah.
Because this is a creature where the power of the creature is entirely independent of its actual base stats.
Right.
this is becoming legendary, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Wait.
It's
So
in
I
my
think so because I think you were mentioning, Pip, that like the power of ASIN is like just using it to copy value creatures like Ravenous Chew rather than going all in on the combo. But with Epic Encounter, you can essentially like if you have an ASIN, you can like flex slot into like, okay, I will now tutor up my big ass thing in this matchup because I know that they don't really have much interaction for this ASIN, stuff like that.
Epic Encounter also allows you to run 7 copies of ASIN via running 3 copies of ASIN in the main deck and then 4 Epic Encounters.
That's true.
Yeah. So.
I wouldn't recommend doing that, but that is absolutely a thing you can do.
All right, should we move on?
Yep. So the next card isn't exactly remarkable, except for it's a very simple thing. It uses the new copy tech from Zendikar Rising. It's just copy target spell. You may choose new targets for it for Jeskai. Simple, straightforward. I think this is the type of design that every designer got excited for when the new rules change dropped there. So
Yeah.
in MSEM, it's a little expensive, and being tricolor hurts it.
Yeah. The thing
Yeah, I
I'll
don't
note
think this
is
gets there at all.
you can't cast this on your own spells like plus 3 minutes too much. So you have to view this as like a clone for your opponent's stuff. So if that's good, it's good. Probably won't be.
So
the next card is a really exciting addition to MSEDH because hey, look, now we have we're up to 6 4-color legends. Thanks, Kahembo. But I think the thing that actually makes this card, I think this card's actually just straight up nuts in actual MSEM. This is a 3-mana 2/2 that draws every single legendary card, not just legendary creature, in the top 5 cards of your library. Did you know that we actually have a 5-color land where the requirement is just it can only be spent on legendary spells? Did you know that we have a bunch of other like really fucked up 5-color lands if you're just playing non-stop legendary creatures all the time?
This makes me very sad that like I guess since you're playing this with 5-color lands, it's fine anyways. But then like makes me very sad that this doesn't have green for Epic Encounter in it. But yeah.
Yeah, like the main thing that I think this card does that's really cool is it just makes it so you can't run out of gas. Once you play this, you draw somewhere on the order of 2 to 3 cards, but they're all live cards, and this is still a 2/2. And it's a 2/2 that can protect your other things if you have mana to put into it, which means your opponent, like, it's just kind of a messed up Mole Drifter is really what it is.
You can
And
also get
sometimes
additional
you have
copies
mole
of it.
people. Yeah.
Yeah, just the potential for this to be just like, even if this is like 3 mana, draw 3, it's more than done its job.
Yeah, for sure. I think this is definitely pretty big value engine.
Yeah.
So our next card is Haunter Spirit. Oh no, sorry, Ghastly Spirit, which is a 3/2 with flying. And with ETBs, you mill 4 and then recur a land from a graveyard, or sorry, a non-land card from a graveyard to your hand. One thing that happened to me when I was building a deck like a couple years ago is I ended up splashing green basically solely for Archive Guardian because it was the only good Eternal Witness we had. Ghastly Spirit now allows blue-black / Esper / Grixis decks to have access to that effect. Because one of the things that's really true is the number of times where you get to actually conjure Archive Guardian are few and far between. They happen, but they're not the main reason why you play it as a card. And the fact that this also kind of digs for deeper, and 3/2 with flying is so much more relevant and scary than a 2/2 that just like sits around at the ground. So I don't know. I don't think this card's going to replace Guardian in any list. I think if you already can run Guardian, you should. I think that's better than this. But I think this means that you're no longer kind of forced out of just blue-black X.
That's true.
I could see
Yeah, that's
running
a
a
good
split
point.
of Guardian this in something like Podlight, where you're going to be tutoring it anyways. So if the body is relevant, or if nothing in your grave is super, or like if you want to dig for something to recur rather than just, oh no, I want to get my What Lurks Beyond, something like that.
I don't think you can justify this in Podlight just because of how important Guardian's Conjure is for outgrinding your opponents, and also how fucked up Conjure is with Sun Yun.
That's fair. Okay. So next up is, I think, yeah, the man who ate an Umbreon. It's Lucian the Ravenous.
So
Wait,
this
he
card is
what?
kind of.
Oh man, is Kevin
Allegedly.
We're not
behind on the
on the
lore?
internet now.
He allegedly ate an Umbreon. Anyway, so Lucian's kind of only has one mode. That mode is he kills creatures, and he kills them really effectively. He can effectively exile 2 creatures. It's not actually exiling because technically, if they,
If he dies, then they'll go back to the yard.
yeah, if he dies, they'll go back to the yard. If they flicker Lucian, those creatures enter back under their control. Like there's some weird shit going on with merging. But
Right.
the important thing to just consider is that this card does stone cold nothing unless your opponent is playing creatures. But if your opponent's playing creatures, this card is like kind of busted. Like it just permanently kills all their X1s really trivially while picking up their abilities. Like Lucian becomes a mana rock after he kills the first mana ascetic, and he doesn't have summoning sickness, so you can actually tap him immediately for mana. Or you -2, and now when they kill Lucian, he creates a 2/2 bear because you exiled a Snowfield Mother. Like that sort of thing gets dumb really quickly. I don't think the -6 is like particularly appealing. Like it's fine, but it's not. I don't think that's why you play this card, and I think you need to be careful because this card is literally only good if your opponent is playing creatures. I really
Yeah,
cannot state that enough.
if you +1 3 times, you probably didn't get creatures that you really want to make copies. Is the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, one last thing before we move on. It's actually perfect for killing Luna, the Umbreon. And if you do, Lucian becomes invincible because whenever creatures attack, he just phases out. So, fun stuff.
Oh no.
No.
Okay. Next one is Lunar Vigil.
Lunar Vigil, the version you are seeing is not the actual version that is being printed because the version that you're seeing is a broken in half with Intel and Erasure. So now it can only replace 1 draw per instance of drawing a bunch of cards.
Yeah, so
I think that takes it to not super playable levels.
Yeah, agreed.
It's just, but yeah. So this is, This is Karina. So Karina's the one whose Umbreon got eaten. She's just chilling outside waiting for the Umbreon to come back, but it's never going to come home because it was eaten by Lucian. Thanks, Lucian.
Allegedly.
Allegedly.
I cannot overstate this enough. Allegedly.
Mm-hmm.
Professor Maple, Dodger, I believe you can confirm that this has already seen some amount of EDH play.
Yeah,
But, yeah.
It's like the EDH card, pretty much. Like,
Look, they printed a broken Simic card for EDH. Woo.
yeah, I mean, it goes nuts. In MSEM, it's far too clunky and vulnerable to removal. But
Yeah, in MSEDH, you're only going to be having one copy of each creature, so it's just like, oh yeah, okay, so all of my creatures become copied. Cool.
All right, I actually really want to talk about the next card though, because this is a super interesting Planeswalker.
Okay, take it away.
Yeah.
So it's Naito alone. It's a 3-mana walker with 4 kind of utility abilities. So there's no real ultimate here. They're all just kind of small amounts of loyalty, but they all do like pretty different things. So I think what Naito really plays well as is kind of a weird version of Teferi, but with more play patterns. So you can play this and immediately -1 delay a threat, or you can use it as an expensive bounce spell. And also the ability to like kind of act as a looter, with the option to dump 2 mana into keeping a card is nice. The 0 feels a little less useful, but the fact that it gives you lifelink until your next turn means this is really great with vigilance creatures, and it also just lets you get some extra defense if you happen to have a good blocker. So overall, I think it's just a very versatile card that might find homes in a lot of different decks just because of all the different stuff it does.
Yeah, mana denial is pretty nice on the -1.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think this card just does a lot of little things very effectively. And the fact that the +2 is just card selection that makes it like not like 4 toughness or 4 loyalty isn't like hard to kill, but it's not like they do need to put some power into it. And then in the late game, once you no longer care about card selection, it just becomes straight up card advantage. Like this card, I think will be a very skill testing card to play with. Because there's so many ways that you can just fuck up by using the like blatantly wrong ability, especially because the +2 is effectively 2 different abilities. The -2 can do so many different things. The -1 can do so many different things. The 0 is usually not going to be the reason you put it in your deck, but then every so often it will be the right one. It's a card that's very exciting from a spike perspective.
Right. Yeah, definitely agree with that. Any other thoughts before we move on to the next one?
Nope.
All right.
So next one is Silent Hypnotist, which is basically it's a side grade meddling mage, where you can only stop non-creature spells from being cast, but it also does the Pithing Needle thing of shutting them off if they're already around on the battlefield. So
Yeah,
a pretty
and
versatile and powerful hate bear.
this can
Yeah.
turn off lands too.
Yeah, the fact
can-
that it's fetch lands just makes it disgustingly good.
I think hitting fetch lands is really important. I think Buzz.
Oh man, hitting Monument with this is actually, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I didn't clock that it stopped like Monument, Nareba, Heart.
yeah.
I mean-
It doesn't stop Heart because that's a mana ability.
Oh yeah, never mind. Sorry.
But
Fancy mana ability.
this is a great card for Esper Peak Tribal, so I'm into it.
It's great for us for peak travel. It's another thing that you should be monumenting in. Like, meddling mage is one of the things that made humans work in modern. It's what makes Esper Vile work in Legacy. It shows up in Miracles and some weird Delver sideboards from time to time. Like, meddling mage is not a card to be trifled with. This is a card that is noticeably worse in a pretty real way because there are some number of creatures you really don't want your opponents to cast, especially in MSEM. But hey, your Planeswalker is turned off is also kind of nice.
Yeah, being able to turn off stuff that's already in play, I think, is a good upside.
So Titanic Fossil / Arisen Tyrant, I'm not super seeing like, is this just a good 5/5? Or is this just a good 5-drop? Is the logic?
Yeah, so the logic is basically you're running ways to get this into your graveyard in a value positive way. and then it's just a finisher you can cast from the graveyard. But if you do need to, like, if you're in a pinch and you don't have anything else to do, like running this out on turn 2, and then on turn 3, like, I don't know, I'll cast my removal spell or whatever, like, one more
Yeah, you
time.
can hold
That's
this up for stuff like unravelings, kill spells, and the fact that the transform is instant speed means like if you're a control deck, you can just always be threatening a 5/5 that gets you value just at any point.
yeah.
I do want
That's
to
very much
ask though, y'all, is Nautilus an existing creature type?
I'm
I
pretty sure it is.
don't know. I think it is.
Okay, because
Yeah, there's a card called Crystalline Nautilus in Journey into Nyx, and that has Nautilus type. Actually, I remember.
wild.
Yep,
Okay,
and Chambered Nautilus from
Yeah.
Mercadian Mass. Although that was a beast when it was printed.
okay. Today I learned.
So
Sweet, all right.
trainee Karina Oblate has a very important line of text, which is she proliferates. Yay. She's a 3-mana walker that can produce a mana that creates card advantage. That's neat. She's only ever draws 1 card at a time off the -X. But I think the main reason you play her is because you decided that having Ayashi wasn't enough.
I like this with Dregs of Order.
That's
It's
Isn't
can-
it better
weird, but
than,
okay.
other options that you have? Like, this isn't the only proliferate card we have.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
that's
think what's attractive about this is that it, again, like you put like you put in the same like Ayashi Arita deck and then go buck wild basically.
Yeah, it's pretty much like Walker
And
Tribal.
and she also like, or if you want like like a good proliferator, but not one that dies to a stiff breeze, like she effectively pluses up to 5 because she proliferates herself, so she can take some good hits when she comes down.
It's also good with Lunar Vigil, which is something to consider. But
Yeah, that's some good flavor right there.
yeah.
Counters
So-
Herald in lists, yeah.
All right.
Let's talk
Next card.
about Tyrant of Tributes. So, this is one of my favorite 7-drops that has Tyrant in its name that causes people to sacrifice permanents when it enters the battlefield. The other one being Ravaging Tyrant, for people not
Yeah.
know the joke. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a 7-drop, 6/6 flying haste, but you're never casting it for 7 mana. This is like being
It's-
cheated out somehow.
It's losing
blowing
haste,
up.
right?
I believe so.
Yeah.
And it enters, they realistically lose half their lands because you cheated it out, and then you try to just go ham on them before they recover. I played the cheat out deck back when Ravaging Tyrant could blow up lands, and also back when one of the cheat out spells that it had blew up lands, and even that only felt like just barely enough. So
Yeah, I
this
feel
is
like you
a
just
little
play
bit
you play
better
Valir,
warrior
you play
card.
Chikyu Champion. I feel like those are your big cheat out targets, and Tyrant just sadly just wades out into the ocean and never comes back.
So I think the fact that you can also just ramp into this is kind of nice.
That is
if you're
true, but then
casting
if you're
this, my
ramping
opinion-
into it, like I feel like at 1 mana cheaper you get like Roland and Laren Alpha, which are more reliably rampy into, and also I don't know, I feel like those are a lot more solid because I feel like if you're getting to 7 mana consistently, you can like your 7 mana payoff can just be RFE. Like
yeah, fair.
I am sad it's each opponent for MSEDH. That'd be
oh yeah, that would be hype.
That'd be
But also terrifying because Jesus Christ, 7 mana is nothing there.
So let's talk about a specific onion, which is this kind of weird flying hate bear with flash that, like, if the hate bear effect ever pops off, you probably win the game on the spot. This is Warden of Time. It also has a neat little engine mode at the end of it where you can bounce creatures you control to their hand. You can do this in response to removal spells. It's like this card does like a couple interesting things at an okay level. It doesn't do any one thing in particular, but the opportunity cost for including it is really low. And if you ever get someone with that time effect, you win the game on the spot. So
yeah.
Yeah, I think where this is good is in like if you suspect turns decks are happening, You could put this in a granny sideboard, and it's a good granny XP. Like, you have to pay
Or
mana into it, but then like it does the granny thing while also sometimes just yeeting your opponent.
or
I'm
Kilia, the
yeah.
the the squid
The
Proco.
saboteur, yeah.
I'm really low on this type of. I'm really low on turn state in sideboards because the odds of it coming up are so astronomically low. Like, there's a reason Potion of Inhibition has like a sub, or at one point had a sub 30% win rate. Like, I don't think putting Warden of Time in your sideboard is a good way of spending a sideboard slot. I think the thing that makes Warden of Time good is you can actually justify putting it in the main deck because the opportunity cost is so low.
Yeah,
Like
I
being a
think
flash flyer that happens to be copies like 5 through 7
Yeah, like
of Granny is just good.
yeah,
it's
that's
fair.
the reason you're playing it.
Okay, so with that, we're done with the multicolored cards. We're going to be getting into the lands and artifacts now. And the first one of these is Lucky Egg. So this one, I put this on the list mainly as I think an MSEDH thing. I was just thinking of it as like, if your commander has some powerful like triggered abilities, this could work in like an illusionist bracers sort of way. Was basically just
Yeah.
my thought process.
Would you like to know the most busted thing you can do with this?
Hit me.
It's Seeker of New Horizons.
Oh.
Yeah, fuck
You know
it
what?
is.
I was hoping a fun commander, but no, it's just stupid,
No, it's
broken landfall, baby.
Don't forget that if your thing has an intervening F clause, that would make it shut off that your Lucky Egg is not so lucky. So don't try to do
Right.
things with Professor Maple and Lucky Egg. You'll be
I like
sad.
that. I like that this flavorfully like makes your creatures evolve faster. I think that's pretty neat. Definitely a
Yeah,
flavor
because
win.
it doubles up on
Doubles your
experience triggers. Mm-hmm.
Yep. All right. What's next?
Next up is Maple's Journal. EDH staple for sure. Like just absolute slam dunk EDH card. I think that it's a bit clunky for MSEM most likely, but it's certainly not like unplayable if you do cast it for like 2 mana.
Mm-hmm. It's just a card advantage engine that is too slow for MSEM but is gas in MSEDH. Okay, so the next card we have is Forgotten Temple. So this is actually it's good because it's a cheap manland that incidentally grows by you using it for mana. Of course, the issue is Monument of Queens exists. This does become bigger than Monument of Queens quicker, in the sense that if you play this and just use it for mana, let's say starting on turn 2, you sink far less mana into this than Monument of Queens for it to be potentially terrifying. But Monument of Queens just more consistently has keywords, and is just like, huh?
It works better with Jobaya though, since it's not tied to the animation.
That's true. Yep. I think that this card is better than Monument of Queens now that Monument of Queens costs 4 mana in some decks. Namely decks that don't have a ton of extra mana to pump into it, and also decks that will have cards in their graveyard to fuel it.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think
like
the problem is like if you
also,
have cards in graveyard to fuel it consistently, you probably want it to be doing other things with those cards.
the problem is also like you want this card to be down early, and that means sometimes like you don't want to play your color land on turn 1 necessarily. And the like having this sit around for like you can always top deck Monument in a much instantly take over, whereas this it kind of has to sit around for a bit before it's like actually going to be doing a ton of damage. You
Yeah,
know?
that's right. You can't just windmill Samus when you have Heart of Seeking and immediately pump it to like 3, and then go
Yeah,
on.
yeah. So I think that's definitely an issue with it. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like there are going to be some niche lists though where this can really shine, especially if you have a lot of random creatures that happen to give this bunch of extra keywords. Particularly something like Double Strike is a big one, I think, as
Yeah,
well
I
as just
think.
flying, and Lifelink is another big one.
Mm-hmm. I think the fact that it specifies creature card is very sad because you can't just exile Monument to Queens with this and then just have all of it. Just
Well,
not.
Monument Queens doesn't natively have those abilities anymore.
Oh, okay. Yeah, never mind then.
Yeah. But yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I think it's a sweet card. I think it might see some niche play.
Yeah. So next up we have Ice Path, which is basically it turns all of your colorless to be able to be filtered into a specific color, which I'm not sure where this would see play. Maybe if you wanted to be able to play a highly pipped card in a deck like Chop Shops, but other than that, I'm not sure what the utility of this would be.
Yeah, so I think that this is the kind of card that has long-term implications for decks that may want to be heavily colorless for various reasons. Maybe they just want a lot of utility lands. Maybe some new cards get added that want you to have colorless mana. Whatever. This also is nice for decks that want to run like a lot of artifacts that produce colorless mana. So Rip 11th Hour Breakthrough, but like maybe a deck wants to run Hub of Innovation and I don't know, some other like Mind Stone esque thing. And that deck might also want to run, I don't know, Charismite Vault and or Calderossa Workshop and or whatever. Like at some point, like you might have trouble casting your spells with all that extra colorless mana if you're already trying to cast spells like that have high pip numbers. So for example, like this would be good in the Fateful Eruption deck I played because that deck wanted to run a lot of colorless lands, but it also wanted to go double blue on turn 3 and double red on stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know. I think this card has an interesting niche. Is where I land on it.
Yeah, I think that like entering tapped though is such like a nail in the coffin. That like it's not like other utility lands in the format where you can just play it and it's a fine untapped colorless source. Like man,
Yeah.
of all the lands to have to enter tapped, this is a painful one. I think because we have far better utility lands that don't have to suffer that.
And also, you can sometimes just run the filter lands, like the Worlds Away cycle, and those are fetchable too. So those,
Yeah.
like, yes, they enter tap, but they also, if you're just trying to
So-
run 2 colors, like those
So
might.
basically, this is just like it's super niche and not very good, but it might be good in very specific circumstances in the future. And I think our final card today is going to be Ruined Lab. So this is
Oh, are we not doing power play?
no. So this
Oh,
is Ruined Lab. So it, like we were mentioning, this is a utility land which actually enters untapped, and so what it does is for each 6 cards, once you have 12 cards in your graveyard, it becomes a soul land. If you get to 18, it becomes a tri land, and so on and so forth. The main thing is like where is this useful in MSEM? And I think the answer it isn't, but it's useful in like MSEDH if you're playing a grave focused deck.
So I actually think this is useful in MCM. We discussed earlier how it's not that hard to play your graveyard super quickly if you're properly utilizing fetches and cantrips and all these things.
Sure, but that's for a threshold of 6. I think 12
Yeah.
is a lot harder and requires a lot more of the nuts. Like, oh, oops, I got 3+ Oracle's Visions, haha.
That's true.
Which is
I
also
think
why
that,
like cards I guess if you're playing like a Hunter's Hideout deck where you naturally expect to get that many cards in your graveyard and you're planning to go long, and you're not playing like 3+ colors, this could be fine. But yeah.
Yeah, I think it requires a very specific shell, which maybe includes some niche cards. And I'd look to someone like El Makino to build with this because it often like El Makino is good at finding like kind of specific interactions that have been overlooked. But I definitely think like in the long run, this is a card to keep an eye on because the soul lands are always powerful. And the fact that this can also scale means like the opportunity cost of running a colorless land in your deck is that high compared to this sometimes just randomly being a soul land or even a triple land. In my opinion, I don't know.
No, yeah, I think you're swinging me around to it a little bit more because I was just thinking of it in the context of like a Hunter's Hideout deck. But yeah, I think you don't think of this in the same way.
I don't love this in Hunter's Hideout just because that deck can be pretty hip heavy.
That's literally the best. Okay, 100% that is the. I'm going to say that that is the best deck for this card because it's a deck that wants to go late, and also ends up committing a lot to the graveyard. I don't think there's any other deck which has that overlap. It is pip heavy specifically for Hunter's Hideout, and like,
So you know how we were talking about maybe you need extra ways to use colorless mana. Well, we just talked about Ice Path.
oh my god, but yeah, I think, but yeah, I still think that like that if there's a shell for Ruined Lab, it's going to be Hunter's Hideout.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I wouldn't say this is bad Hunter's Hideout.
Okay.
All right. So is that it?
Yeah, so once again, thanks everyone for watching. Thanks again for Pip had to go, but thanks for Kevin and Dodger for joining me on this review. And
Anytime.
and we hope you enjoyed playing with Monsters of Chikyu in MSEM. I'll be linking the set page in the description. It's going to lead to some really interesting new decks as we talked about here. And I think it's been a while since we've seen a set that is, I think, allowing for the creation of as many new decks as this one. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just I want to say, just kind of as a small confession, it was going over this set that inspired me to dig out my old copy of Pokemon movie, and that's just been some nice nostalgia. In fact, this entire time we've been doing the review, I've been driving back and forth to power level a Machamp for Norman.
Oh my god. Yeah, yeah. I've also started a server with Cajun and Cajun who's the creator of the set, and a few others for playing like Pokemon Dodgers on there. So I think definitely there's been a little bit of a Pokemon renaissance in like the custom Magic space because of the set, and I love that. But yeah, overall I think that we can conclude with this is a mechanically solid, intriguing set, which is also a beautiful love letter to the Pokemon IP. So thank you, Cajun, for this set, and I'm excited to play
Please,
it at MSEM.
Nintendo.
Mm-hmm. And I think before we go, I think there's one last card that Kevin wants to say something about. Power Plant or something?
No, I that was very nice of you to do, but I already got my free Angel touched in last stream during the post GP bit, so that's my one for the quarter. I'm not allowed anymore. It's actually in the contract.
Yeah, rest in peace, Angel Touched. May you never be freed. Thanks for watching, y'all.